Case of Sharon Edwards. David Edwards, a dedicated and respected solicitor. After completing his studies, he moved to Chorley, Lancashire to live and work, where he was highly regarded by his colleagues. David was kind and friendly, which helped him make friends easily in his new town. He developed a passion for football, and as he attended more local matches, he felt increasingly connected to the community. Every weekend they would travel together to watch matches, both home and away. David was well liked in this group for his ability to make everyone laugh and for his willingness to help those in need. In his career, David practiced law with enthusiasm and quickly gained respect in the local community due to his exceptional legal skills. Over time, he became a popular lawyer. This experience further solidified his reputation, and he often received compliments from colleagues and clients alike. During work, David encountered a couple in need of his legal expertise, Sharon and her husband. Sharon, born in 1974, in her younger years, she was in a relationship with a man, and together they had 2 sons, but they separated while the boys were still very young. Later, Sharon had 2 daughters. From other relationships that did not succeed, she gained a reputation among her neighbors as a difficult person. Sharon struggled with heavy drinking, which created a chaotic environment in her home. She often exhibited domestic violence toward her partners and children. Ironically, one of her sons became a frequent target of her anger and suffered both physical and mental abuse. Over time, the abuse escalated, and he was eventually kicked out of the home as a teenager. Fortunately, his grandfather welcomed him to live with him. Sharon sought David's legal advice regarding a dispute with her neighbor. Her life continued as usual, characterized by frequent violent and abusive interactions with those around her. In 2004, her then partner filed complaints against her for assault, alleging that she had bitten his forearm and hit him in the face. However, the police only issued her a warning. David was making significant progress in his career, but his intense work schedule often left him exhausted. His friends would tease him about dozing off during football matches due to his fatigue. Meanwhile, his personal life felt stagnant, which was frustrating for him since he longed to start a family. One night, things took a positive turn. David and his friends decided to go to a local bar for a karaoke night, a regular outing where they enjoyed drinks and fun. At the bar, David met a young woman from Chorley, who also frequented karaoke nights. She was excited to see David and was charmed by how he creatively altered the rhythm of songs. As the night went on, filled with drinks, singing, and laughter, David and she formed a connection that quickly developed into a strong friendship. A few months later, they became a couple. She appreciated not only David's company, but also his dedication and professionalism in his career. She often attended court to watch him handle his cases. When she became pregnant, David was extremely excited. Over the next 9 months, he was attentive and caring, attending all of her medical appointments, keeping the house tidy, cooking, and ensuring that both she and their future child had everything they needed. On the day their daughter was born, David cried tears of joy as he held her for the first time. He was very happy, and that happiness continued as little girl grew. David took care of all the little girl's needs, changed her diapers, and comforted her when she couldn't sleep. However, over time, that happiness began to fade. When little girl turned 5, they decided to take a break, hoping that the separation would help rekindle their feelings for each other. After 7 months apart, they realized that the best choice was to end their romantic relationship while preserving the friendship that had brought them together in the first place. David, understanding that he was single, yet feeling lonely, began to consider the possibility of meeting someone new. While browsing a social media platform, he accidentally seen Sharon's profile. Recognizing her from a case he had worked, he decided to send her a friend request. She accepted, and over the next few weeks, They exchanged messages and agreed to meet for drinks. When they finally met in person, they felt a strong attraction to each other and both enjoyed drinking. Without hesitation, David invited Sharon to his home that same evening, marking the start of their intense romance. They soon decided to live together, and David quickly rented a large 4-bedroom house where he moved in with Sharon and her 4 children. At first, everything seemed fine, but after a few weeks, Sharon began to return to her violent habits. One night, while she was drunk, she insulted David and then pushed him, causing him to fall and break his collarbone. When he visited his therapist to address the injury, he joked that his girlfriend had grabbed him hard by the shoulder. Then, during a visit to his daughter at his ex-girlfriend's house, David came up with a new story to explain the fracture, claiming he had fallen down the stairs. Sometime later, David was supposed to pick up his daughter to take her to a party, but he had been drinking beforehand. When he called his ex-girlfriend to confirm that he was on his way, she immediately realized that David was drunk and refused to let him take their daughter, clearly unhappy with his behavior. Dissatisfied, Sharon drives to her ex-lover David's house. Upon arriving, Sharon kicked the door and shouted, demanding that the little girl come out. At that moment, the little girl's mother was returning from work and was shocked by the disturbing scene caused by Sharon. A heated argument ensued between them, and Sharon had to leave without achieving her goal. From the outside, David and Sharon appeared to lead an almost perfect life. David had become a partner at a law firm and owned a house worth $390,000. This situation provided Sharon with financial stability and a chance for social advancement. She adorned herself with expensive jewelry and always dressed impeccably. The only thing Sharon could not buy with David's money was education and self-control. Her fiery and confrontational personality remained unchanged. Nevertheless, David believed wholeheartedly that Sharon was the right one for him. Overwhelmed by love, he goes to the renowned jewelry quarter to purchase an engagement ring, and they became engaged on Christmas 2014. Colleagues at the law firm and court officials started to notice that something was wrong in David's family life. He came to work with bruises under his eyes and scratches on his face. When people asked about his injuries, he claimed he had simply fallen or bumped into something. However, David once shared his difficulties with Deborah Livesley, a former long-term partner of his. She encouraged him to leave Sharon, file a police report, and reclaim his life, but David dismissed her advice. In June 2015, David and Sharon traveled to Las Vegas to get married. The night before the wedding, another incident of violence occurred. While they were looking at photos, Sharon claimed she had shown David what true love was over the past year. David, however, did not react with the joy she expected, and the evidence of their altercation was still visible on his face. On their wedding day, Sharon wore a white lace sleeveless dress, while David had to apply makeup for the first time to cover his bruises. After returning from Las Vegas, David received some upsetting news. A competitor had taken over the company, and he was being laid off. They had already planned a honeymoon trip to Spain, so despite the unfavorable situation, they entrusted their home to Sharon's youngest daughter and went on the trip. However, upon their return, the tension in their marriage intensified instead of improving. On the day they got back, while shopping for wine, Sharon confronted David in front of other customers, expressing her frustration. This confrontation was captured by surveillance cameras, and they left the store with 4 bottles of wine, which marked the start of increased violence in their relationship. Once they got home, Sharon attacked David with a knife. Sharon's youngest daughter discovered him shortly afterward. When Sharon's youngest daughter confronted her, Sharon claimed she never meant to hurt David, despite how unbelievable that sounded. Later, David and Sharon went to a bar, with David still bleeding while Sharon continued to drink. At the entrance of the bar, a police officer on patrol noticed Sharon yelling at David and attempting to assault him. The officer intervened and recorded the incident with the camera attached to his uniform. Initially, Sharon acted as if nothing was wrong, but moments later, she began to accuse David again while trying to avoid the police, who were attempting to calm her down. Sharon reacted violently, flailing her arms, while David claimed he hadn't attacked her and that his injuries were from a fall. The police officer decided not to arrest Sharon. Instead, he placed David and Sharon in a patrol car and took them home. During the ride, the officer's camera captured Sharon threatening to kill David. However, the police dismissed her threats, thinking it was just a drunken woman's tantrum, and left them at their home. Once home, David and Sharon resumed their argument. On Saturday, August 23, 2015, Sharon followed through on her earlier threats. She stabbed David in the heart with a knife. 2 hours later, she acted shocked and distressed, running outside to call for help from neighbors and claiming her husband was not breathing. One neighbor came to assist and called emergency services. The paramedics who arrived found David in his bed with no signs of life. The police quickly began questioning Sharon. She claimed that after a heated argument with her husband, he took a knife and stabbed himself. Despite her account, the police arrested Sharon on suspicion of murder and took her to the station for further questioning. Sharon insisted that David was not dead, cried, and wanted to speak with him. Her story seemed unconvincing to the investigators from the start. They also noted her aggressive demeanor, which raised further suspicion. Upon examining the crime scene, investigators found it unusually neat and clean, suggesting that someone had deliberately cleaned up. The pathologist later determined that David died from a single knife wound to the heart. Additionally, the autopsy revealed 60 external wounds on David's body, both old and recent, including 30 cuts or stab wounds, as well as injuries on his knuckles and a superficial wound on his scalp. The estimated time of death was 1 to 2 hours earlier than what Sharon had reported, indicating that she had enough time to clean up and plan her next moves. The gathered evidence provided sufficient grounds to charge Sharon with murder. To avoid any potential bias due to her relationship with David, it was decided that the trial would take place outside of Lancashire. The trial occurred on March 8, 2016, at Manchester Crown Court. The jury stated that Sharon, who had a domineering personality, had beaten her husband during their brief relationship. The lead prosecutor stated that the case exhibited all the tragic signs of domestic violence. As part of her defense, Sharon attempted to present herself as innocent and vulnerable by allowing the court to watch a video of her wedding. In the video, she expressed her love for her husband, referring to him as her other half and beloved. She also claimed to have no interest in knives and expressed disgust toward them. However, the jury did not find her explanations credible. Consequently, they unanimously found Sharon guilty of murder. Before sentencing, Judge William Davis pointed out that her actions had taken a good person away from society. Sharon showed no emotion when the verdict was read and remained calm when she was sentenced to life in prison. After leaving Manchester Crown Court, David's younger brother spoke on behalf of his brother and other abuse victims. He highlighted the importance of male victims sharing their experiences, noting that many men hesitate to report abuse due to the stigma of weakness. He also expressed gratitude to the jurors and shared that the family felt relieved the trial was over, allowing them to focus on the positive memories of David's life. On December 5, 2017, Sharon filed a petition in the London Court of Appeal, attempting to clear her name. She also criticized the media coverage of her case. However, 3 senior judges denied her request to appeal her conviction, stating that her petition lacked sufficient grounds. They rejected her application for leave to appeal. During the hearing, which she attended via video link from prison, the court noted Sharon's history of abusing others and her multiple attacks on David. Less than a year later, Sharon's second child, who had suffered from his mother's violence during childhood, attacked his girlfriend and then took his own life. Reports suggest that feelings of guilt and memories of his mother contributed to this tragic outcome. The case of Danilo Restivo. Elisa Claps was born in 1977 in Potenza, Italy, a small town with a population of just under 70,000, known for its steep slopes. Her mother was a treasury clerk, and her father worked in a tobacco shop. Elisa was the youngest of 3 children, with 2 older brothers named Gildo and Luciano. The family was very religious and attended church every Sunday. Elisa was known for her kindness and sweet nature. She always focused on the good in people, which sometimes made her seem naive. This drew others to her, so she had many friends. In 1993, 16-year-old Elisa was in her senior year of high school and was thinking about her future. She dreamed of becoming a doctor and planned to enroll in medical school after graduation. Her ultimate goal was to volunteer in Africa with Médecins Sans Frontières. On September 12, 1993, Elisa was preparing for a family gathering at their country house and wanted to get everything ready early in the morning. Her parents and one of her brothers had gone out of town, while Gildo was expected to arrive later for lunch. As usual on Sundays, Elisa planned to go to church with her friend Eliana de Silas, who would also join the family for the festive meal afterward. Elisa woke up early that morning, left home at 11:30, and went to the Church of Chiesa della Trinità, located in the center of town. Her brother was waiting for her return. While he was waiting, the doorbell rang, and he thought Elisa had come back from church. Instead, he found Eliana at the door. She explained that they had been together at church, but when they exited, a large crowd passed by, and they got separated. Eliana said she couldn't find Elisa and decided to come to her house, hoping she had already returned. From the start, her explanation seemed unconvincing since it was hard to lose track of someone in such a small town. When her brother pointed out these inconsistencies, Eliana changed her story. She admitted that Elisa was supposed to meet a boy and that the plan was for the schoolgirls to go home together after the service. However, her friend was unable to find Elisa at the agreed time. According to Eliana, the mysterious boy was named Danilo Restivo. He was born on April 3, 1972, in Irese, a small town in Sicily. In the mid-1980s, Danilo and his family moved to Potenza, Basilicata, after his father, Maurizio, secured a job as the director of the municipal library, a prestigious position that prompted the family to relocate. The other boys found Danilo to be unusual. During his school years, he engaged in troubling behavior, such as spying on girls in the bathroom and keeping a diary to record what he observed. His cousin, who is 2 years younger, described him as an introvert who struggled to communicate with his peers, particularly girls. Danilo's sister, Antonella Restivo, noted that they would often walk home together, and he would try to persuade her to go to different places for various reasons. She usually declined, but one day her curiosity got the better of her, and she wanted to see what Danilo was talking about. Not wanting to go alone, she asked her cousin, who was 11 at the time, to join her. When the children arrived at the designated time and place, Danilo told them he needed to blindfold them and tie their wrists so they could go to a secret location. They both agreed. Danilo led them to a place where he seated them in chairs. Antonella managed to push her blindfold aside and saw Danilo putting on gloves. After that, he took a knife, tilted the cousin's head back, and stabbed him. Antonella reacted quickly and attacked Danilo, causing him to flee. The cousin was injured and bleeding, but Antonella helped him, and they both ran away together. Danilo chased after them, shouting for them not to tell anyone about what had happened. The cousin lost a significant amount of blood, and when he arrived at the hospital, doctors discovered that the knife had come dangerously close to a vital artery. He was on the brink of a serious injury. The children informed the adults about the incident, clarifying that it was not an accident. Consequently, a police report was filed against Danilo for his actions. Danilo's father, Maurizio, visited the family of Danilo's cousin and tearfully asked them to withdraw the police report. He offered them money and claimed to understand Danilo's psychological issues, promising to get him the help he needed. Because he was a respected member of the community, Danilo's cousin's family agreed to his plea. They accepted the money and dropped the report. However, instead of fulfilling his promise, Maurizio obstructed Danilo's treatment to protect his own reputation. As a result, Danilo changing schools several times without finding a place where he felt accepted. After attending 3 different schools, his father eventually enrolled him in a private college where he graduated from high school. Danilo then joined the military, but was dismissed shortly after due to inappropriate behavior and bedwetting. Despite his father's wealth and connections, Danilo struggled with personal issues. He earned a reputation for being intrusive and rude toward girls, and his father did nothing to intervene, allowing Danilo's behavior to worsen. He became fixated on 3 girls in his neighborhood, spying on them and developing an unhealthy obsession. He would call them, breathing heavily into the phone or commenting on their outfits. Sometimes, he even played classical music over the phone, which made the girls uncomfortable. His actions escalated to sending disturbing letters and creepy gifts, including a timer with severed wires labeled, "Boom, this is how much time you have left." One of the girls, Elisa, became the main focus of Danilo's obsession. He would show up unexpectedly in places he knew she would be and ask her out on dates, but Elisa did not like him and found him annoying. Despite this, her kind nature led her to agree to meet him several times while trying to maintain her distance. Elisa's brother Gildo noticed Danilo's intrusive behavior. One day, while walking with Elisa, Danilo approached them, calling out to her and trying to pull her away. Elisa squeezed Gildo's hand tightly, indicating her fear, and Gildo chased Danilo away. Gildo was concerned by his sister's frightened reaction, but Elisa chose not to share the details of her encounters with Danilo. When Elisa's friend Eliana mentioned that Elisa was supposed to meet Danilo at church, Gildo became worried. Meanwhile, Elisa hoped this meeting would stop Danilo from pursuing her. Gildo called Danilo's house, but Mr. Maurizio hesitated to let Gildo speak with his son. Gildo expressed his concern that Elisa had not returned home after the meeting with Danilo. Eventually, Mr. Maurizio gave the phone to Danilo, who said he had seen Elisa at church. He claimed she had complained about a young man bothering her and then left while he stayed behind to pray. After that, Mr. Maurizio quickly ended the conversation, making Gildo suspicious. He informed her family about the situation, and they all hurried home to find Elisa. One of her brothers, Luciano, couldn't wait any longer and decided to confront Danilo directly. When he knocked on the door, Mr. Maurizio refused to let him in, prompting Luciano to threaten to break it down. Finally, Danilo appeared, looking anxious and sweating, and began repeating the story he had told Gildo on the phone, stuttering and clearly nervous. Minutes later, Mr. Maurizio suddenly ended his conversation with the neighbor, similar to how he had ended the phone call. The brothers returned home and then went to the church where their sister had already gone. They wanted to check the location where Elisa was supposed to meet Danilo, believing this was likely where she had disappeared. They looked around the church and attempted to enter the upper secret room, but the priest did not allow them in. The family decided to notify the police about Elisa's disappearance, expressing their belief that Danilo was involved. Unfortunately, law enforcement did not initially take the case seriously. They only accepted the report after a day and then went to Restivo's house to question Danilo. Upon arrival, they spoke with Mr. Maurizio, who informed them that his son had left Potenza for Naples and would likely return the following day. The next day, the police went to the bus station in Naples to meet Danilo, but he was not there. It was later discovered that Maurizio had intercepted the bus before it reached the city and took Danilo away. The detectives then went to the family home to question Danilo. When they asked him about the shoes he was wearing on the day Elisa went missing, he said he was wearing sneakers and showed them a pair of wet shoes soaked in bleach, which raised their suspicions. In the evening, Danilo and Maurizio visited the police station, where Danilo shared his account of Elisa's disappearance. His statements were inconsistent, and he appeared visibly nervous. The detectives noticed a deep cut on his hand, which Danilo attributed to an accident in the street. He claimed he had tripped on a staircase and impaled himself on a metal object. He said the deep cut caused heavy bleeding, which stained his clothes. However, Danilo could not identify the location of this incident in the city. Wherever he took the police to support his story, there were no signs of blood. Additionally, his account changed several times during questioning, raising further suspicion. According to his sister, at noon when Elisa disappeared, Danilo returned home covered in blood. She recounted that when he returned home, not only his jacket was stained with blood, but also his shirt and jeans. She noticed Danilo's injury and took him to the hospital, where doctors stitched up his wounds. Judging by the description, it was evident that there was far too much blood for a mere accidental cut to his hand. Despite Danilo's explanation, the police quickly concluded that his injury was caused by a knife. By this time, all the clothes had been washed at the Restivo home. The investigators needed these items to send for forensic examination, explaining that this way they could clear all suspicions about Danilo. But Danilo's family objected. From 11:30 to 13 on the day Elisa went missing, no one saw Danilo, and there was no one available to confirm his statements. At this time, the police officer contacted the chief prosecutor overseeing the investigation into Elisa's disappearance. Despite the reasonable suspicions, the request for a warrant was denied. The prosecutor overlooked the fact that Danilo had previously been involved in a suspicious incident. Additionally, he was clearly the last person known to have seen Elisa alive. Witnesses reported seeing him in the church with Elisa, but none saw her leave. Investigators found a torn-out page in Elisa's diary, suggesting she or someone else was trying to conceal something. Progress in the case hit a standstill until October 5, when Elisa's disappearance and the main suspect, Danilo Restivo, were highlighted on a television program. During the live broadcast, an anonymous woman called in, expressing her belief that Danilo was connected to Elisa's disappearance. She mentioned that he had a fascination with women and collected strange items, including framed locks of hair. To acquire these hair samples, he often loitered near hair salons, where local workers jokingly referred to him as a barber. After the show aired, several women approached the police to identify Danilo and accuse him of cutting their hair without permission in public and hair salons. The police began to view him as someone exhibiting obsessive and inappropriate behavior, which raised concerns about potential deviance. The women shared troubling accounts of his actions, indicating that he was a disturbance to his neighbors. While some considered him an eccentric but harmless individual, they remained unaware of his more sinister traits. Danilo's father maintained that his son had never harmed anyone, although there are stories of incidents involving Danilo's cousin. While many believed that Danilo was involved in Elisa's disappearance, some of his supporters suggested that Elisa had simply left on her own. Elisa's father, who was very close to her, felt early on that he might never see her again. Meanwhile, the Silas family was attentive to the ongoing developments regarding Danilo. The incident lasted until 1996. He was charged with providing false testimony about Elisa's disappearance. Detectives had gathered evidence that contradicted his claims regarding their interactions, his hand injury, and other aspects of the case. Because of his fraudulent behavior, Danilo was eventually sentenced to prison, and he spent part of his sentence working at the local church that Elisa often attended on Sundays. During the trial, Elisa's best friend, Eliana, was not forthcoming when asked about the false testimony. When the prosecutor pressed her, she revealed her fear that she might suffer the same fate as Elisa, implying that she knew more than she was admitting. Although some of his harassment victims reported him to the police, he only received a fine, which had little effect due to his father's wealth. Meanwhile, the Silas family was anxiously awaiting updates from investigators, hoping for progress in locating their daughter and bringing the perpetrator to justice. Unfortunately, the case remained stagnant until 1999, when a mobster began cooperating with the investigation, providing some new information. While he could not provide details about Elisa, he disclosed that the district attorney had prevented the confiscation of Danilo's clothing. This attorney had canceled the warrant in exchange for a large payment from Mr. Maurizio, effectively hindering the investigation. The mobster was ultimately convicted of slander, but his disclosures prompted a new investigative team to take over Elisa's case. Unfortunately, they had to start from the beginning. The police obtained a search warrant and searched Danilo's home, where they uncovered disturbing items, including a box of photographs of women with visible physical disabilities. Danilo claimed these women were his ex-girlfriends, but it was later revealed that he had intentionally sought out one-legged and one-armed women to photograph, exposing his fascination with mutilated bodies. Investigators also looked into the church to access a door that the local priest, Domenico Sabbia, had previously refused to open for the Chilis family. The priest had locked the church doors to all parishioners and had traveled to Fiji for a wellness retreat, showing little willingness to cooperate. After his release, Danilo traveled across Europe. Although he was in different cities, he continued his reckless behavior by attempting to harass women by cutting their hair. Danilo had moved to the UK after meeting Marsango online. They married, and he accepted her 2 children from a previous relationship. He occasionally returned to visit his parents, always appearing calm. Meanwhile, Gildo created a website to raise awareness about her sister's disappearance. Then, Gildo received a letter signed Elisa, stating that she had run away to Brazil and requested not to be searched for. Realizing it was a fake, Gildo traced the sender's address and discovered that Danilo himself had sent the letter. This revelation heightened the suspicions against him. The case remained unsolved until November 12, 2002, when authorities discovered the body of Heather Barnett, a 48-year-old single mother, in her home in Bournemouth, UK. Her daughters returned from school to find her unresponsive in the bathroom, surrounded by a pool of blood. Heather had been violently attacked with a hammer. Her throat and one of her breasts had been severed. A portion of her hair was cut, and about 30 strands were placed in her left hand. A strand of foreign hair was found in her right hand. It is believed she was assaulted shortly after arriving home from school that morning. During the investigation, the police quickly turned their attention to 2 suspicious neighbors, Marsango and Danilo, both of whom were Italian. Heather worked from home, and it was reported that Danilo had gone to her house to discuss sewing curtains. He was the first person to arrive at the scene with Marsango, just as Heather's children were calling for help. He tried to comfort the girls in that distressing moment. The police brought Danilo in for questioning after the murder. He showed them a bus ticket with a timestamp to support his alibi, claiming he was attending computer courses at the time of the crime. The police believed him and let him go. Danilo seemed to be an awkward person who would leave many clues, unlike the actual murderer. The tests revealed a trail of bloody shoe prints that suddenly stopped, indicating the killer had changed shoes before leaving. It was later discovered that Danilo had cleaned his sneakers with bleach, a practice he had done previously. Terry, Heather's daughter, mentioned that her mother had lost her keys after Danilo's recent visit, but she did not change the locks. This explained why Danilo visited frequently. He had scoped out the crime scene and taken the keys to access the house. The police started monitoring Danilo and tapped his phone for evidence. During their surveillance, they observed him stalking vulnerable women. They decided to confront him and search his belongings. Danilo was found wearing suspicious waterproof pants, and in his car, the police discovered a change of clothes, a butcher's knife, scissors, a balaclava, and gloves, which amounted to an alarming collection of potential crime tools. When the police searched Danilo's home, they found hair strands on the sneakers he wore the day of the murder, along with small bloodstains that were difficult to identify due to bleach. DNA testing showed that a bloodied towel left at the crime scene contained Danilo's DNA, which he claimed he had accidentally left behind during a visit. The police reached out to their colleagues in Italy and discovered that Danilo was a suspect in the disappearance of Elisa, leading many to suspect that he had killed her. The matter remained unresolved until March 17, 2010. 17 years after Elisa vanished, her mummified remains were found by a repair crew in the attic of Most Holy Trinity Church. The remains included her glasses, shoes, pieces of her clothing, and strands of foreign hair. Her bra had been cut, her chest showed signs of mutilation, and her jeans were unbuttoned, indicating she had been abused. Her family suspected that priest Domenico Sabbia had intentionally hidden the body and knew where it was, as he had never allowed anyone to inspect the locked sections of the church. Following the discovery, the church was closed. Preliminary forensic examinations revealed that Elisa had been struck approximately 10 times with a sharp object, likely a knife or scissors. While searching the church attic, investigators found fingerprints and DNA samples belonging to Danilo. Elisa was laid to rest on July 2, 2011. Before, on the afternoon of May 20, 2010, Danilo was arrested in England and charged with the murder of Heather Barnett, with accumulating evidence against him. On June 30, 2011, Danilo Restivo was sentenced to life in prison by Winchester Crown Court. Danilo immediately filed an appeal. On November 8, 2011, a simplified judicial process began in Italy for the murder of Elisa. Danilo, the accused, chose not to participate, even via video link. At that time, legal proceedings in Britain were still ongoing, which resulted in his extradition being denied. The prosecution argued that Danilo had planned to meet Elisa at the church that day with harmful intentions. When Elisa realized his intentions, she tried to escape by hiding in the attic, but he found her and attacked her from behind. Despite her attempts to defend herself, he abused and killed her. The prosecution presented DNA evidence from bloodstains on Elisa's clothing that matched Danilo's. It was also revealed that Danilo had injured his arm during the struggle, leaving his blood on her clothes. The Italian prosecution requested a 30-year prison sentence, which the court granted on November 11. Additionally, Danilo was ordered to pay €700,000 to Elisa's family. This verdict was confirmed after the final court proceedings, which included Danilo's presence. After the appeal of the Heather Barnett murder case in November 2012, the UK Court of Appeal altered Danilo's minimum sentence to 40 years, stating that it was highly unlikely he would be released. So, in 2051, after completing his sentence in the UK, he will be extradited to Italy to serve an additional 30 years for the murder of Elisa. The long delay in the Elisa Claps murder case was due to several factors, including accusations against the Santissima Trinita Church in Potenza and various individuals involved. These factors contributed to the concealment of the truth and prolonged the investigation. An assistant to the priest, who was found earlier, explained that he did not report the discovery right away because the archbishop was busy that day, and he forgot to do so the following day. Despite protests from Elisa's family, all charges against the church were eventually dropped, especially after the relatives reacted to a memorial plaque that was placed in the church to honor Domenico Sabbia, who concealed the crime and hid the body for many years. In early November 2023, despite objections, the church reopened and the first service was held. The family of British victim, Heather Barnett, criticized the Italian police's investigation, arguing that if Elisa's body had been found sooner and the perpetrator apprehended, Heather would still be alive. They claimed that the lack of accountability had emboldened the suspect, with some believing he may have committed ritual murders. Elisa was murdered on September 12, 1993, and Heather on November 12, 2002. It raises suspicion that he attacked his victims on those specific dates and left a strand of hair at each crime scene. There are concerns that Danilo Restivo may have had many more victims. Omar Benguit, who has been convicted of murdering Korean national Jong Ok-shin, was sentenced for the crime. Jong Ok-shin was attacked a few meters from her home, 3 blocks from where Danilo lived. There are lawyers suggesting that another individual, Danilo, may have committed the crime for which Omar was sentenced. They claim that the method of murder and the knife used are similar, and a clump of hair was discovered near the body. Jong Ok-shin was killed in 2002, but there is currently no evidence to directly link Danilo to this murder, which is why he has not faced charges in this case. Danilo is under suspicion for assaults on women in Italy, France, and the UK during his stays in those countries. Among them, he is particularly being investigated for a possible link to the disappearance of Erika Ansermin in Italy. Erika went missing on April 20, 2003, after failing to arrive for an Easter lunch with her boyfriend and his mother. Following Danilo's arrest, investigators discovered that he had searched for information about Erika on his computer and appeared to be tracking the developments of her case. This behavior has raised concerns, as it is often exhibited by offenders. To this day, Erika's body has not been found, and no charges have been filed in connection with her disappearance. The case of Paul Lambert. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes danger is closer than we realize. Today's story illustrates how even ordinary events can become a nightmare for someone. Paul Lambert, who was born Paul Scales, was born in 1980 in Queensland, Australia. He had an older sister and several half-siblings from his father's side. When Paul was 4, his parents decided to divorce and agreed that their mother would have custody of the children. Despite facing some challenges during this time, Paul appeared to be a typical child. However, as time went on, his mother began to notice troubling behaviors in him. She took him to a doctor, who diagnosed him with a disorder related to his parents' separation, suggesting that it would improve over time. Unfortunately, several years passed, and Paul's behavior continued to deteriorate. By the time he was 10, his mother was nearly in despair, as her son had become completely uncontrollable. He was diagnosed with multiple conditions, including attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and began treatment that seemed to provide some relief. Despite facing many challenges, Paul excelled in school. In 1998, he graduated from high school and enrolled at the Queensland University of Technology to pursue a degree in business and finance. His intelligence allowed him to succeed with ease. After completing his studies, he obtained a job in the finance department of a motorcycle dealership in North Queensland, where he worked as part of a large team. His co-workers found him charming, articulate, intelligent, and friendly, always ready to assist others. He even helped a colleague raise funds for her daughter's medical treatment. However, that is only a part of his personality that he wants to show to everyone. Although he appeared kind and generous, regularly donating to charities and supporting friends and family, his true nature was known only to his family. In reality, he was a manipulator struggling with mental health issues who refused to seek help. A skilled liar, Paul used his eloquence to achieve his aims, often employing threats of self-harm as a tactic to manipulate others. From 2003 to 2010, Paul had several different girlfriends, all of whom were beautiful. However, a troubling pattern emerged in his relationships. He exhibited extreme aggressive behavior. By the 6th year, 5 different women had obtained restraining orders against him, but even this did not stop him. He violated several of them and was held accountable. Paul treated all his ex-girlfriends similarly. They described him as a manipulator who sought to control their lives in a cruel manner. He frequently belittled them emotionally and even became violent when discussions about breakups arose, creating unsafe conditions for their well-being. Paul had a troubling habit. He would reach out to the families of girls who tried to leave their unsatisfactory relationships. Whenever he sensed that he was losing control, he would repeatedly call the girls' relatives, trying to intimidate and stalk them. His goal was to delay the breakup and keep his latest partner with him for as long as possible. To do this, Paul made up stories and attempted to hide his actions. When the truth came out and difficult conversations started, he often blamed his mental health issues. It seemed he genuinely believed that his disorders could excuse his cruel and irrational behavior. However, the girls and their families insisted that he needed to seek help from a psychiatric clinic. Unfortunately, he did not seek help on his own, and law enforcement did not take action, allowing another girl to fall under his influence. Paul claimed to have dissociative identity disorder, describing his personalities as good and evil, and sometimes giving them names. He admitted that he might have as many as 9 different personas. Despite this, Paul was a charismatic individual with a strong ability to charm women. He was attractive, but his idealized relationships quickly fell apart, typically lasting no more than a month. In 2014, he tried to settle down by proposing to his ex-girlfriend Samantha, whom he had dated in 2008. However, their relationship ended due to his aggressive and cruel behavior, which included stalking her, although they remained in contact for 6 years, during which Samantha urged him to seek professional help. Paul managed to persuade her that he could be a good husband and would definitely pursue treatment, leading her to agree to marry him. They officially tied the knot on February 2, 2014. Of course, all his promises turned out to be lies. Initially, things appeared to be going well, but within a few weeks the situation started to deteriorate rapidly. After 7 months of living together, their marriage had become unbearable. Paul was losing control, and Samantha felt ready to end the relationship for good. In a last-ditch effort to save their marriage, she suggested they take a trip together. In September 2014, they traveled to Orlando, Florida, hoping to improve their relationship before returning to Australia. Although the trip seemed romantic and had the potential to mend their relationship, once they returned home, Paul continued his old behavior. Unsurprisingly, the situation only worsened. Then, Paul creates a profile on Tinder, presenting himself in the best possible way. He received messages from many women, but was searching for something truly special. He connected with Brittany Killa, a beautiful and well-known 32-year-old television presenter with a promising future. Brittany was using the app to find a relationship, and Paul quickly caught her attention. They began messaging, then exchanged social media and email contacts, and eventually had several video calls on Skype. Paul is completely captivated by Brittany, to the point where he wants to end his relationship with his wife. In March 2015, Paul informed Brittany that he was going to Florida because he wanted to be with her. By this time, they had developed a good rapport. Brittany had no idea that Paul was hiding significant issues. He was adept at concealing his flaws, and Brittany unwittingly became another victim. When Brittany learned about his divorce, she expressed that she didn't want to be the reason for his family's breakup. She asked Paul to stay in Australia, but he lied, claiming he was already divorced and had no ties holding him back. This convinced Brittany to give him a chance, and she agreed to spend 3 months with him to deepen their connection. Finally, they met in person. Although Paul is not officially divorced, he continued to deceive Brittany. At first, he presented himself as a caring and loving man, but soon, his true nature revealed itself. Brittany noticed his odd and unpredictable behavior, which suggested he was struggling to manage his emotions. As a sensible person, Brittany understood that the relationship should come to an end. Unfortunately, this decision was a clear signal for Paul to take action. He started overwhelming Brittany with messages and calls, insisting she spend the next 3 months with him, as they had initially agreed. He believed she could not simply abandon her commitments, claiming he had traveled across the ocean for her, and felt that she had treated him poorly. But all of this was in vain. Paul could not convince Brittany. Then, Paul began telling her that his father had just died, and he needed support, claiming that Brittany was the only close person he had in the U.S. Ultimately, this worked. She believed his story, thinking that no one would make up something like that. Her father had died from a brain tumor a few years ago, so she understood how hard it was for him. Paul knew about this and intentionally used this trick to manipulate her to lure Brittany into a trap. She supported him and tried to build their relationship. Of course, this didn't affect his behavior. He became increasingly unstable. So after a while, Brittany decided to cut ties again. Then, Paul began to threaten to take his own life. Unfortunately, this trick worked again, and their relationship continued. What bothered Brittany most was her boyfriend's behavior when she had to work away from home for long hours. He sent her dozens of messages and emails, and could even call her when she was on live air. Naturally, this was a significant problem for the journalist, and could potentially cost her the job she had dedicated her entire life to. Brittany couldn't withstand the pressure and tried to break up with him again. Then he started making up new absurd stories that became increasingly bizarre. Paul started telling her that all this time she had not been dating him, but his twin brother, who was the one behaving inappropriately. This time, Brittany did not believe these stories. Then Paul recounted how he had been abused in childhood, claiming that this had led to his current emotional state. Paul again tried to elicit pity from Brittany in every possible way. This whole lie culminated in he confessing that he had a brain tumor and would soon die. Paul added that he was afraid of dying alone. He was once again convincing enough for Brittany to believe him. All of this led to the continuation of their relationship. But Samantha lived in constant fear. She cried every day, and panic attacks began. During the day, Brittany was so tense that she felt constantly unwell. She planned to exit the relationship again, but Paul was prepared to keep her. He threatened to expose naked photographs of her. Now her career, which she had built her entire conscious life around, was at stake. Paul even started sending threatening messages on Brittany's social media, calling her a killer and hinting that he would take his own life if she broke up with him. As a result, Brittany was forced to delete several of her social media profiles. As a public figure, she needed to manage her social media presence to promote herself. Naturally, Paul was aware of this and willingly used it as a means of control. All of this could not continue indefinitely. Eventually, Brittany left him and contacted the police. Like all the previous women in this period, he actively bombarded her with compromising messages and stalked her wherever he could. She reported all of this to law enforcement, who took the case seriously. On May 11, Brittany sent a text message to Paul, warning him not to stalk her anymore and not to try to contact her through any means of communication. Then Paul sent 2 more letters demanding payment in exchange for stopping his harassment. In reality, Paul earned a decent living from extort money. He was very frugal, drove an old car, and rented a tiny, modest apartment. However, in the following days, Paul still showed no signs of stopping his bullying actions. It seemed he was still trying harder to cling to his victim. During this period, he began talking about his 9 personalities. Brittany was in shock and terrified, as she had never dealt with people suffering from dissociative disorders before. Thanks to Brittany's work through social media and television, Paul was able to easily gather information about her. He followed her through news broadcasts and publications. Paul began showing up near Brittany's home and workplace uninvited, and he was able to intimidate her to the point that it became increasingly difficult for her to go on live broadcasts. During those moments, she couldn't feel calm in front of the camera because of the overwhelming fear. Thanks to the lawyer hired by Brittany, Paul was arrested and charged with stalking and extortion. Eventually, he admitted to stalking, but again claimed he was insane. During this time, Brittany learned that all of his stories about twin brothers and tumors were false. His father was actually alive and well. She was shocked by the extent of his deceit. Soon after, Paul was deported to Australia and banned from entering the US. After being forcibly sent back to his home country, he changed his last name to Lambert, his mother's maiden name. This seemed to be his attempt to clear his name, which had been tarnished by legal issues. When Samantha found out about his deportation, she contacted the police because she was worried he might try to come back to her since they were still married. As a result, the police issued a restraining order against Paul from approaching her. Despite this, Paul continued to harass her with calls and messages, but she chose not to respond. On February 22, 2016, Paul persuaded Samantha to go with him to a divorce lawyer to sign the divorce papers. She agreed, which turned out to be a grave mistake. During the ride, he began to insult her and threatened to crash the car so they could die together. When Samantha asked to be let out, Paul suddenly sped up, and in the panic, he hit her in the face. Fortunately, she managed to escape from the car and call the police. Paul was subsequently arrested and charged with kidnapping and assault. They finalized their divorce on June 19 of that same year, and Paul faced a Queensland court where he was sentenced to 10 months in prison. However, he was released on parole shortly after. Following his release, he was placed on 12 months of probation and had his driver's license suspended for 2 years. A few months later, he broke the terms of his parole again by moving to another state in Australia and starting a new job without informing his parole officer. Initially, law enforcement was unaware of his actions. Each time he was supposed to check in, he flew from state to state, pretending to live his previous life. It was later discovered that he had much more serious problems than simple depression. From August 2015 to May 2016, he attended numerous therapy sessions with a psychologist. During this time, his behavioral issues also came to the attention of psychiatrists. Although Paul was prescribed several medications, he refused to take them and eventually stopped seeing the specialist altogether. Shortly after his divorce from Samantha, Paul began using his favorite dating app and quickly met a new woman. This woman was Angela J., a 28-year-old doctor who had just finished her residency and worked at a hospital in Sydney, located hundreds of kilometers away from him in another state. Angela was also looking for a life partner after her own difficult divorce. Upon meeting Paul, she felt an immediate connection. They went on their first date, followed by several more, during which Paul acted calmly to win her over. Angela noticed they had a lot in common and eventually invited him to meet her family. While she seemed genuinely happy, her father sensed something was wrong within minutes of meeting Paul. He warned his daughter that this man would bring trouble, but sadly, his warning went unheeded. Angela and Paul had an agreement. She would focus on her career and not be disturbed during the weekdays while working at the hospital, and they would meet on weekends. Initially, everything went well, but soon Angela began to feel uneasy. She sensed that someone was watching her and discovered that someone had entered her home without permission while she was at work. Paul started to act increasingly provocatively, prompting Angela to end the relationship. When she shared this news, Paul cried and resorted to his usual tactic of threatening self-harm. When she tried to set boundaries, Paul revealed that he had a personality disorder. He escalated the situation by inventing a fake friend named Dan, buying a phone for this imaginary friend, and using Dan to manipulate Angela further, claiming that he was end his life due to her desire to break up. This made Angela feel guilty. Eventually, she agreed to spend some time with him, feeling pressured by her professional ethics as a doctor who wanted to help. Angela made it clear that she only wanted to support his recovery and did not wish to pursue a romantic relationship, which seemed to satisfy Paul. Then, Angela had invited him to a reunion, and when they met, she reiterated that they were just friends. Throughout the evening, Paul acted unpredictably, even stealing Angela's handbag with all her belongings. After several hours of persuasion from some of Angela's friends, her property was finally returned. Angela's sister came to her aid just in time and helped her escape. By morning, the sisters reached out to the police because they had received threatening messages overnight. Initially, the police did not take action, even though they were aware of multiple similar crimes committed by Paul. He had violated 5 restraining orders and the terms of his parole, along with committing various other offenses. The next day, Paul rented a white Corolla hatchback and went to a hardware store to buy a utility knife, an axe, and 2 rolls of tape. While driving, he was pulled over for speeding, but it is more of a routine document check. He was driving illegally since his license was still suspended, but he managed to convince the officer that he was unaware of the restrictions. Surprisingly, the officer let him go. That evening, Paul met Angela at her doorstep, right after she returned from visiting her sister. Once inside, Angela received a frightening message from Paul. Alarmed, Angela ran to her neighbors for help, fearing that Paul might come for her. They assisted her and called the police. Help arrived at her home around 9 p.m., and Angela was taken to the police station. After explaining the situation regarding Paul, a criminal case was opened. Following the police's advice, Angela decided to stay with her relatives for safety. She asked the landlord to change all the locks. To protect herself, she kept knives all over her house so she can quickly defend myself in case of attack. Meanwhile, Paul was near her house, hiding from the police and attempting to buy a weapon. Paul went to a weapon shop but was unable to purchase one due to his suspended license. Later, he returned and asked to buy a hunting knife, which he was given. That same day, he rented a room in a hotel directly across from the hospital where Angela worked. After that, he sent a message to the entire family saying he was going to end his life. However, his relatives, who had tried to help him for many years, were exhausted by his constant lies and stopped responding to such comments. On November 2, Paul returned to the hardware store and bought a crowbar, a hammer, and several zip ties. When Angela came home in the evening and went to her bedroom, Paul suddenly jumped out of the closet and attacked her with a knife. He covered her mouth with his hand, leaving her unable to fight back. However, Angela managed to stall him by asking to go to the bathroom. Terrified, she decided to try to escape. Unfortunately, Paul quickly caught up with her and began stabbing her. The first strikes hit her legs, followed by 11 wounds to her chest and arms. Despite her injuries, Angela somehow managed to get up. Paul then poured gasoline on her and even into her mouth, but she refused to give up and screamed for help. Fortunately, a neighbor walking his dog heard her cries. Realizing what was happening, the neighbor grabbed a crowbar from his work vehicle and rushed to her aid. Angela seized the opportunity to slip out of Paul's grasp, causing him to slip on a puddle and fall. This gave her crucial seconds to escape, and the neighbor helped her reach his house, where his wife called for help and tended to her bleeding wounds as instructed by Angela. Finally, Angela was taken to the hospital, and the police began searching for Paul. However, he had already disappeared by that time. Remarkably, around 7:05 a.m., While Angela was being transported to the hospital, Paul called her. Instead of speaking with her, he only heard the furious shouts of the neighbor who had rescued her. Paul hung up and called his mother. During this call, he told her he intended to take his own life and asked her to apologize to Angela on his behalf. She didn't believe him and hung up. He then called the police, speaking about harming all the women he had known. He claimed he couldn't control himself and that they would be in danger as long as he was alive. The police tried to convince him to turn himself in, but he simply hung up. Thanks to this call, the police were able to track Paul's location. He was traveling along the eastern coast of Australia. A chase began at 9:15, but Paul was driving so recklessly that the police had to stop the pursuit. They set up spike strips on the road, which successfully halted his vehicle. Paul exited the rented car with a knife and ran down the road until he encountered 3 officers. Although the officers had their weapons drawn, Paul showed no intention of surrendering. He was blinded by a powerful flashlight, which only made him more aggressive. Meanwhile, the police attempted to negotiate with him, urging him to give up, but he seemed intent on dying. Paul even shouted, asking what he needed to do for the officers to open fire. They attempted to calm and distract him, but one of the police officers approached from behind and fired a taser. Unfortunately, the taser failed to make contact because Paul was wearing thick clothing. This infuriated Paul, who then menaced the officers with a knife. Suddenly, multiple explosions rang out from all directions. At 9:37, 36-year-old Paul was shot and killed. His wife was informed of the incident, but she was unable to cry or feel upset. Angela was in the hospital at the time. She had been saved and was not in danger of losing her life despite suffering 11 stab wounds. Upon hearing that Paul could no longer harm anyone, Angela felt a sense of relief. Many women who had been victims of stalking experienced varying degrees of depression and post-traumatic stress, but ultimately, they all managed to rehabilitate and recover. The case of Langert family. Jennifer, Jean, and Nancy Bishop, 3 sisters who grew up in a wealthy Chicago suburb, shared a close bond. The youngest, Nancy, was known for her mischievous and cheerful personality and was often called the comedian of the family. Her artistic nature and sharp sense of humor made her stand out. Even their strict and reserved mother couldn't help but laugh at Nancy's jokes. As they became adults, the 3 sisters still maintained a close relationship. Nancy was eager to marry, have children, and create a loving home. She dreamed of dedicating her life to family and motherhood. When she was 20, Nancy met Richard Langer, and they were a perfect match. Richard, 25, was tall, intelligent, and charming. The two married in 1987 and began working together at a coffee company. Month after month, Nancy longed and prayed to become pregnant, but it didn't happen. After 3 years of waiting, in 1990, Nancy finally became pregnant with Richard's child. It felt like a miracle, and they were overjoyed. The pregnancy was deeply cherished, and Nancy proclaimed 1990 would be their year. At the time, Nancy and Richard were temporarily living in a house owned by Nancy's parents. The townhouse was located in Winnetka, Illinois, a small, quiet, and safe village about 16 miles north of downtown Chicago. They eagerly anticipated moving into their own home. Many days later, on Saturday, April 7, 1990, Nancy and Richard went to a restaurant in Chicago to celebrate one of Nancy's sister's birthdays. They enjoyed a pleasant evening with close family members. Nancy's sister Jean gave her a few baby items in anticipation of their first child. Late that night, after leaving the restaurant, Nancy and Richard returned to their house. The following day, Nancy's father came by to visit Nancy and Richard. When he arrived at the Langer house, he rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Noticing that the door was unlocked, He let himself in and saw that the basement light was on. As he went downstairs, he was met with a horrifying sight. His daughter and son-in-law had been killed. Devastated, he called the police and informed their loved ones about the tragic discovery. When detectives entered the basement, they quickly realized they were dealing with a brutal murder. Blood and a metallic scent filled the air. Nearby, they found a pair of handcuffs, and in the backyard, a glove was discovered near the fence. Surprisingly, all the items in the house remained undisturbed. Nothing was taken, not even the $500 in cash left openly on the floor. Investigators theorized that Nancy and Richard had attempted to bribe their attacker with the money in hopes of saving their lives. Police believed this was a planned attack. A police task force was formed to investigate the Langert case. They soon figured out how the killer entered and exited the townhouse without being seen. Behind the house, a bike path led to Chicago, suggesting the perpetrator climbed over the fence to enter and exited the same way. No witnesses reported any unusual behavior. Richard was the first victim. He was attacked once in the back of the head. Nancy was attacked twice, in her side and her stomach. Realizing she would not survive, her final act was to leave a message in her own blood. She drew a heart and wrote the letter U, a gesture that would deeply haunt her family. Detectives began investigating the lives of Nancy and Richard. There were rumors suggesting a link between their coffee company and banned substance, but no proof was discovered to back up these claims. The family struggled to understand who might have wanted to harm them, as Nancy and Richard did not have any known enemies. Information soon emerged about Nancy's sister, Jeanne, and her supposed connections to the Irish Republican Army. Jeanne, a lawyer and human rights advocate, was believed by the FBI to have been working undercover with the CIA while posing as an activist. It is thought that her identity was leaked in Ireland, causing the IRA to mistakenly target Nancy, believing she was Jean. The FBI insisted that Jean disclose her ties to the IRA to aid the investigation. Additionally, they noted that several months prior, Jean had received death threats from individuals believed to be associated with the IRA. Given that she had just returned from Northern Ireland 3 days before the murder, investigators had pressing questions for her. However, Jean denied all allegations and refused to assist with the investigation. The claims linking Jean to the IRA were never proven. As weeks went by, the police task force assigned to investigate the Langert family murders was disbanded due to a lack of leads. Then, 6 months after the murders of Nancy and Richard Langert, a high school student from the local high school approached the police with information. He stated, "I know who killed the Langert family. It was my friend, David Biro. He told me he did it, but did not provide any reasons for why he committed it." David, 16, was arrested the following day near his home, and authorities searched his room with a warrant. Under his bed, they discovered the murder weapon, a stolen .357 Magnum revolver, which was confirmed to have been used in the murder. Additionally, David's room contained handcuffs similar to those found on Richard at the crime scene. David lived near the Langert family's home and could easily reach it using bike paths, but the motive for targeting Nancy and Richard remained unclear. David claimed he was not involved in the crime and that the weapon belonged to a friend. It was later revealed that David was the son of a friend of the Langert family. His father had worked for Nancy's father. Every year, David's father would send the Langert family a Christmas card featuring their family, which included David. David was known in the community for causing trouble. He once fired an air rifle at people passing by his window and was involved in an arson incident. From a young age, he showed signs of sociopathic behavior. At 14, he attempted to poison his family by adding a toxic substance to the milk during dinner, which made it taste spoiled. After this incident, his parents sent him to a psychiatric hospital for minors, but he was released less than 2 months later. despite doctors recommending further treatment. David convinced his parents to avoid sending him back, and they did not seek additional psychological evaluations for him. The hospital's discharge summary noted, "At the time of David's discharge from the hospital, we believed he was a danger to himself and others." David's parents were aware of his dangerous behavior. However, they chose to ignore it and continued their lives as if nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, David actively sought excitement, which he found in the home of Nancy and Richard. During the trial, David remained brazen and arrogant. Investigators believed that the Langer family were targeted not for who they were, but for where they lived. Prosecutors and detectives argued that David's motive was his ambition to commit a perfect crime. In the fall of 1991, David Biro went to trial. The prosecution's case hinged on this perfect crime motive, bolstered by compelling evidence. David had confessed to a friend, and murder-related items, including the weapon, were discovered in his room. David maintained his story, that he was only holding the weapon for another boy, whom he claimed was the actual murderer. Prosecutors and investigators strongly disagreed with this account. After a 2-week trial, the jury quickly reached a verdict. David Biro was found guilty of 2 counts of homicide. He received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge also imposed an additional life sentence for the death of Nancy's unborn child. Nancy's family felt a sense of relief knowing that justice had been served. Jennifer expressed, "He will die on the cold prison floor, just as Nancy died on the cold basement floor." Despite this, Nancy's relatives were still plagued by many unanswered questions for David. The most pressing ones were, why did he do this? How could he commit such an act? 22 years later, they finally received an answer. Jean reflected on the impact of Nancy and Richard's tragic deaths at such a young age, which prompted Nancy's sisters to make significant changes in their lives. They began advocating for weapon control and opposing the death penalty, traveling nationwide to share Nancy's story. They sought to support victims of violence. In an unexpected turn, both Jean and Jennifer chose to forgive David Biro, despite his refusal to confess to the crime. 13 years after the tragedy that befell the Langer family, Jennifer reached out to David by writing him a letter. "I would be happy to receive a letter from you if you'd like to talk to me." David replied, "I'm not going to admit to the crime, but I'd like to be your pen pal. It could be fun." In 2012, Jean wrote her first letter to David 22 years after the murders of Nancy and Richard. In her letter, she stated, "I forgave you a long time ago, and if you'd like me to come see you, I will." A few weeks later, Jean received a response from David. When she opened the envelope, she found about 15 pages of text. This letter contained the information she had been waiting to hear for over 2 decades. David wrote, "I think it's time I finally be honest with you. I am guilty of the murder of your sister Nancy and her husband Richard. I also want to take this opportunity to express my deepest condolences and apologize to you." Jean was overcome with emotion and cried. In the letter, David agreed to meet Jean in person. 5 months later, she visited the correctional center to see him. David confessed that he had gone to Nancy and Richard's house with the intention of robbing them. He planned to wait for them to return home so he could steal their money and car. However, when they came home, David panicked and committed a terrible act. In June 2012, just a few months before Jean wrote her letter to David, the U.S. Supreme Court made an important ruling. They decided that mandatory life sentences for juveniles are considered cruel and unusual punishment. As a result, David Biro could be eligible for a reduced sentence or even release. After the meeting, John suggested that David should be given another opportunity. On November 5, 2015, Jennifer and their mother returned to the same courthouse. They attended a hearing concerning the Langert family case. David was not there. The Supreme Court had struck down mandatory life sentences for David Biro, who was only 16 years old at the time of the crime. However, the discretionary life sentence he received for intentionally killing Nancy's unborn baby still stands, as discretionary sentences were not affected by the court's 2012 decision. David Biro continued to serve his sentence and began actively campaigning for his release. He is now one of about 80 inmates in Illinois who were convicted as juveniles and are awaiting resentencing. Across the country, over 1,000 offenders may be eligible for resentencing due to the Supreme Court's 2012 ruling. After the tragedy, Nancy's parents moved into the townhouse that Richard's family had previously occupied. They struggled to forgive David Biro for the loss of their daughter, son-in-law, and grandchild. Nancy's mother admitted that even when she says the Lord's Prayer, specifically the line, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us," she cannot bring herself to say the second part because she cannot forgive David. John continues to visit David, and they have met more than 10 times. During their conversations, she shares stories about her family and Nancy's family. "I hope that with each visit, he feels more and more remorse," she said. On April 29, 2022, the final hearing in the Langert family case occurred. David's lawyer requested that he be resentenced for the death of Nancy's unborn child. The lawyer argued that David was a minor at the time of the crime, and according to a Supreme Court ruling from 2012, should not have received a life sentence. However, the judge decided that David, who was convicted many years ago for the murders of his neighbors and their unborn child, would not be resentenced. The judge determined that David's life sentence for the premeditated murder of Nancy's unborn child did not fall under the Illinois Supreme Court's ruling. Therefore, David Biro will continue to serve his life sentence for the death of Nancy's unborn baby. The case of Omaima Nelson. Omaima Ari Nelson was an Egyptian immigrant who moved to the United States at the age of 18. She was both intelligent and attractive, but her quest for the American dream turned into a nightmare. This is the story of how a once promising woman became a dangerous individual. Omaima was born in 1968. She grew up in a rural area plagued by poverty and family instability. Her father was a harsh and abusive figure, displaying cruelty toward his wife and children. At the age of 7, Omaima endured female genital mutilation, according to the woman's custom and according to her father's wishes, a traumatic experience that left her in pain throughout her life. This brutal procedure was performed with primitive tools, often without anesthesia, and was carried out by her own mother. Eventually, Omaima's mother found the courage to leave her abusive husband, who was also Omaima's father. She took her family to the City of the Dead ghetto in Cairo, surrounded by graveyards. Despite its ominous name, the City of the Dead was once a peaceful place, but had recently become one of Cairo's largest and most rundown slums. It is estimated that over 1 million people live there, united by their shared hardships. Despite her difficult beginnings, Omaima blossomed physically. She grew into a beautiful young woman. When Omaima turned 18, she met an American oilman, Roger Stainbrook, and fell in love. Her family encouraged her to marry him, and she eagerly agreed. They married in 1986, and Omaima soon moved to USA to join her husband. However, their marriage quickly became unhappy for reasons that remained unclear. At just over 18, Omaima found herself alone in America, struggling financially and with limited English skills. She decided that her best chance for stability was to meet men in bars. As returning to Cairo was not an option she was considering, she was determined to keep moving forward. Omaima had limited professional skills, so she worked as a maid and took on various cash-paying odd jobs. Her beauty eventually led her to become a part-time model, which helped her pay her rent. However, She soon grew tired of relying solely on her looks for temporary jobs. She began to seek other ways to secure some income, and at some point, Omaima's way of making money is to become a criminal. She engaged in a series of deceptive relationships with men to extract money from them, moving from one man to another and from city to city. As her actions escalated, she began to tie up her victims and threaten them with a weapon during the robberies, fully aware of the fear she instilled in them. Once she got what she wanted, she would spend the money and look for her next target. Omaima was cold, bold, and ruthless, showing no signs of remorse or sleepless nights over her actions. In 1991, at the age of 23, Omaima moved to Orange County, California, where she met William Edwin Bill Nelson, her main target. They encountered each other while playing billiards at a bar. William, a 56-year-old Texan, was a large man and a former pilot who had lost his job due to a conviction for transporting illegal substances. He served time in federal prison for his crimes, yet many people regarded him as a respectable individual and were willing to support his character. After his release, William relocated to Costa Mesa to start anew and secured a job at a mortgage company. He often bragged about his land holdings in Texas and liked to flaunt his wealth. William was a father to 5 children and a grandfather to 17 grandchildren. Omaima was attracted to older men for several reasons, including her belief that they would treat her better. She assumed that by their age, men had typically achieved financial stability, which was certainly appealing to her. When Omaima discovered that William Nelson owned a red Corvette, she felt she had struck gold the night they met. William's striking appearance, complete with red cowboy boots and a large belt buckle, made it clear that he was a confident and significant man. He also shared that he owned a large cattle ranch in Texas, which appealed to Omaima, who had always longed for someone to take care of her. The chemistry between them was instant, and they fell in love quickly, deciding to marry just a month after their first encounter. They were not interested in making wedding plans or wasting time and money. Instead, they organized a telephone ceremony with an Egyptian priest and then traveled to Phoenix, where they found a justice of the peace to finalize their marriage. Afterward, the newlyweds enjoyed a honeymoon in Texas and Arkansas, during which William introduced Omaima to his family. Everyone admired her strong and determined nature. During the trip, Omaima suffered a serious injury from a horse fall, and although it was quite severe, she chose to take aspirin, have a bit of vodka, and continue their journey rather than seek medical help. One of William's daughters remarked that Omaima was tough as nails. After spending a few weeks traveling and enjoying their new life together, William and his new wife returned to his apartment in Costa Mesa to settle in. Around this time, William called his daughter to share how well things were going. He was excitedly preparing to celebrate their first Thanksgiving together and felt that life couldn't be better. William invited his daughter to join them, but she declined, and that was the last time they spoke. On December 1, 1991, early in the morning, a man named Jose Esquivel was startled awake by loud knocking at his door. Still groggy and confused, he decided to look out the window first. He didn't see anyone at the door, but he noticed a red Corvette parked outside that he had never seen before. Feeling uneasy about the situation, Jose chose not to answer the door at that hour. Later that day, around 1 p.m., the red car returned to his house, and the driver knocked on the door again. This time, Jose answered and found Omaima standing there. She was crying heavily and showed him cuts on her arms and face. She claimed that her husband had been abusing her, beating her, and holding her captive for several days. With great effort, she said she had managed to free one of her hands, grab a nearby lamp, and hit William Nelson to death in self-defense. She insisted that this was true through her tears. Omaima told Jose that she had dismembered William's body and put the remains in trash bags. She said she needed a truck or vehicle to help her get rid of them. In return, she gave him some equipment, and the false promise of $75,000, Jose agreed and told her to wait at William's apartment while he went to get his truck. However, Jose was cautious. As soon as Omaima left, he called 911 and reported her confession to the police. The police found William's car, where they discovered his wife, and they quickly began questioning Omaima. She denied everything, claiming she never said anything like that to Jose, and insisted that William was just in Florida on a business trip. Although she seemed cooperative, her answers to the police were odd and sometimes contradictory. What happened next took the situation to a whole new level of strangeness. The police discovered a suitcase in William's car that contained human organs. Omaima claimed that the remains belonged to a person William had killed. Among the organs was a pair of lungs with black spots, suggesting that the victim had been a heavy smoker. William himself had also been a long-time smoker. The detectives were not yet 100% sure it was him, but at that moment, they already knew they were dealing with a murder. The police swiftly obtained a search warrant for Mr. Williams' apartment, where they discovered many gruesome items. They found several suitcases and trash bags containing human body parts. In William's bedroom, blood was dripping from the mattress onto the bed, and all 4 bedposts were broken, suggesting that a struggle had taken place. They also uncovered a broken lamp and an iron, both stained with blood, human tissue, and hair. The kitchen was chaotic and disturbing. In the garbage can, they found pieces of a thigh mixed with other turkey parts and cranberry sauce. When the police looked inside the freezer, upon removing the bags, they found a large round object wrapped in foil. Unwrapping it revealed that it was William's head. Omaima claimed that she had been held captive by William. Yet, investigators discovered markings around his ankles that suggested he had been shackled. They were uncertain about his wrists, since they were detached from the hands and showed signs of injury. During her examination, a forensic expert determined that the wounds and bruises on Omaima's body were self-inflicted. She was soon taken in for questioning and faced with overwhelming evidence against her. Realizing she had been caught in a lie, she gradually disclosed more information. She claimed not to remember how she killed William and said she woke up to find him in trash bags. She stated that a demon or something inside her compelled her actions. She even described having a vision of 2 bloody women repeatedly urging her that William had to die, which she said drove her to commit the murder. Omaima didn't just kill William. The investigation revealed more horrifying details about his death. He suffered at least 25 blunt force injuries to the head. It appears that William and Omaima were engaging in a consensual role-playing game in the bedroom when she persuaded him to let her tie him up. The dismemberment of his body was so skillfully done that the coroner's office questioned whether this was her first time, or if she had done this before. When detectives weighed the remains, they noticed a discrepancy between the weight of the body parts and the weight listed on William's driver's license. They calculated the missing parts of his body. Additionally, a neighbor reported hearing the garbage disposal running all weekend until it eventually broke, leading investigators to suspect that Omaima may have eaten pieces of her husband. After her arrest, authorities discovered a troubling pattern in Omaima's past, which included relationships with older men, thefts, and a prior arrest for shoplifting at pharmacies. In each case, she displayed aggressive behavior, showed no remorse, and never accepted responsibility for her actions. Omaima was arrested on suspicion of murder on December 2, 1991, and her trial began in Santa Ana almost exactly a year later on December 1, 1992. During the trial, the prosecution called her ex-boyfriend, Robert Hansen, to testify. He shared a disturbing experience in which she had chained him to a bed and threatened him with a gun, demanding all his money. Luckily, he managed to escape and disarm her, but he chose not to report the incident to the police due to feelings of humiliation and shame. Thus, no charges were brought against her. The deputy public defender portrayed her as a victim who acted against her abuser, insisting that she was innocent. In contrast, the deputy district attorney argued that Omaima had planned to escape with William's money, credit cards, and luxury car after murdering him. The trial included shocking testimonies that left many horrified. Omaima revealed to the jurors that she had stabbed and beaten her tormentor, William Nelson, to death. After the murder, she became frightened and entered a trance-like state. She spent 12 hours dismembering his body to facilitate disposal and discarded them in the trash. During the dismemberment, she claimed to have worn a red hat, red high-heeled shoes, and raspberry lipstick as part of a ritual. She believed she was descended from ancient Egyptians and said she communicated with the warrior goddess of Upper Egypt, who is often depicted as a lioness and associated with bloodlust. Omaima asserted that she acted on the goddess's behalf. She believed that the people of ancient Egypt were aiding her in planning to dismember William's body and scatter his remains to prevent him from entering the afterlife. William was castrated in a brutal act, and there were rumors that some of the tortures may have occurred while he was still alive. A psychiatrist labeled Omaima as a psychopath, highlighting the severe issues within her psyche. Despite the absence of any evidence of an attack on her, the psychologist asserted that William had subjected his wife to demands for violent intimacy. This situation was exacerbated by humiliating insults, and when she refused to comply with his demands, William became enraged. During her court testimony, Omaima's lawyer discussed the alleged abuse she endured throughout her life. He claimed she exhibited signs of post-traumatic stress disorder and recounted how nearly all her family members had beaten, tortured, or attacked her in various ways. When Omaima testified, she recounted how her husband yelled, "I bought you and am getting what I paid for," and then simply used her. She stated that this was just one of many similar incidents. In court, Omaima testified that one day she reached her breaking point and attacked William with scissors. She then grabbed an iron and whatever else she could find to harm him further. The judge asked, "We're missing about 130 pounds of William's weight. Do you know what happened to it?" She responded, "I don't know. He was all there," insisting under oath that she never ate anything related to William and claiming she is not a monster. She also mentioned that William often restrained her and had even thrown her cat out of a car window once. Additionally, she recounted a threat made by William during a trip where he said he would bury her body in the desert if she didn't follow his demands. The jury found her guilty of second-degree murder. They did not believe her accounts of an abusive relationship with William Nelson. The Orange County Superior Court jury acquitted Omaima of first-degree murder after determining there was not enough evidence to show that the killing was premeditated. On January 12, 1993, Omaima received a 27-year prison sentence for second-degree murder, as well as for assault, unlawful deprivation of liberty, and robbery against a former boyfriend. Omaima has expressed remorse for dismembering her husband, William, stating, "I knew for sure I would have been killed if I hadn't done this." She was denied parole in 2006 and 2011. In the 1990s, while serving her sentence, Omaima remarried a disabled man in his 70s, who later died. Reports indicate that they had 3-day meetings in the kitchen, where knives were present, but Omaima insists she never felt threatened. She also claims to have loved her new husband and describes him as completely normal. After his death, Omaima is said to have inherited a significant amount of money from him. It is not hard to believe that she has a whole crowd of crazed people who worship her like a god, which she considers herself to be. But beneath Maima's outward beauty lies a true monster. Currently, Omaima is serving her sentence at the Central California Women's Facility, where she is alongside other inmates. The case of Elisa Matthewson. This story takes place in a small town called Valrico, Florida, with a population of about 5,000 people. Elisa was a devoted wife and a caring mother. She had been married to Trevor Summers for over 15 years, but eventually decided to file for divorce. The reason for this is Trevor's relentless need to control every aspect of Elisa's life and their children's lives. When Elisa informed Trevor of her decision to divorce, he vehemently opposed it. He began using their children as tools to manipulate her, hoping she would reconsider. Elisa and Trevor first met in 1995 while attending high school in a Philadelphia suburb. They started dating 3 years later and quickly formed a strong bond. Both were outgoing, charismatic, and serious about their future together, but they felt unprepared to settle down to their lack of career achievements. They decided to prioritize building their careers before starting a family. In 2001, after years of dating, Elisa and Trevor got married, marking an important milestone in their lives. Their friends and family fully supported their decision. At this time, their relationship had stood the test of time. For Elisa, marriage was the realization of a long-held dream of creating a family. Soon after, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Arden. Over the years, they had 4 more children: Landon, Bryn, Grady, and Cooper. Elisa found joy in growing their family, believing that each child added more love to their lives. However, Trevor had different priorities and chose to focus on advancing his career. Trevor initially a landscaping business, but soon moved on to launching a pool building and maintenance company. After that, he ventured into real estate and pursued various other business ideas. He was passionate about being an entrepreneur, and Elisa supported him in all his efforts. However, Trevor often started businesses quickly, and most of them failed before making any significant profits. He struggled to find a clear direction, and most of his ventures didn't generate much income. Trevor's constant pursuit of new opportunities caused the family to move frequently. Over the years, they lived in Pennsylvania, Florida, Vegas, and California, finally settling permanently in Sunshine State. These relocations made homeschooling necessary for their children. Elisa took on the dual role of teacher and homemaker, while their eldest daughter, Arden, helped with chores. Despite her many responsibilities, Elisa managed everything with ease. The family often hosted guests and lively gatherings where Trevor would enthusiastically share his latest ideas. They lived in a beautiful house near the beach, creating the appearance of an ideal life. Over time, their relationship started to fall apart. Arden, the eldest daughter, recalled many happy moments. The family often spent time together at the beach, played video games, or enjoyed board games. While Arden was always close to her mother, she had an especially strong bond with her father and was often called a daddy's girl. Sadly, this close relationship later allowed Trevor to manipulate the situation. As Arden entered her teenage years, Elisa began to notice how Trevor exerted more control over her and the children. With each new child, his dominance grew, affecting every part of their daily lives. Elisa was eventually restricted to wearing only clothes Trevor approved of, socializing only with people he allowed, and having her social media activity closely monitored. He prohibited her from speaking to men online and displayed extreme jealousy. Trevor's possessiveness escalated to the point where he forbade Elisa from standing or sitting near any male strangers at church. He would become upset even if she simply walked past or greeted someone she knew. Some people, including Elisa, believed that Trevor's extreme behavior was tied to the family's financial troubles. By that time, Elisa had witnessed several business dealings that revealed Trevor was deeply in debt, often failing to pay others or collect money owed to him. He was even arrested multiple times on suspicion of financial fraud. Each time, Trevor shifted the blame onto others or external factors. It became increasingly clear that he was not suited for the business world. Despite his repeated failures, Trevor stubbornly defended his business ventures and refused to let Elisa have any input. At the same time, he tightened his control over their home life, becoming harsher and creating an even more oppressive domestic environment. By 2016, Elisa had grown weary of her life and decided to ask for a divorce. However, this was not part of Trevor's plans. He pleaded with her to stay for the sake of their children and promised to change. Still in love with him, Elisa decided to give him another chance. Unfortunately, instead of improving, Trevor became even more controlling. He confiscated her phone and car and forbade her from leaving the house, effectively trapping her as if she were a prisoner. It became clear that this was outright domestic abuse and highly dangerous. Elisa began contemplating ways to escape, unaware that Trevor was also making his own plans concerning her. By October 2016, Trevor's control over Elisa had reached an extreme level. For weeks, he had not allowed her to leave the house even once. He monitored her every move around the clock, never letting her out of his sight. This behavior alarmed Elisa, as she sensed that something terrible was about to happen. She feared what Trevor might be planning and anxiously waited for an opportunity to break free. One day, Trevor left the house to run errands but locked his family inside. Taking advantage of the rare opportunity when he was absent, Elisa secretly used her phone to contact an organization that supports victims of domestic violence. She explained that this was her first chance in weeks to act without Trevor's control. The organization warned her that her situation was urgent and extremely dangerous. That evening, when Trevor returned, he lashed out at Elisa, accusing her of ridiculous acts of infidelity and subjecting her to further emotional and physical abuse. Thankfully, the authorities had already been notified, and their timely arrival at the house pressured Trevor into letting Elisa and the children leave. Reluctantly, he agreed, though it was clear he had no intention of letting go quietly. Elisa soon faced housing challenges, forcing her and the children to seek refuge in a shelter for domestic violence survivors. The shelter provided them with protection from Trevor's control and allowed them to feel somewhat secure. Over time, the harassment stopped, much to Elisa's relief. After several months in the shelter, she believed their ordeal was over and moved out with the children. With the support of social services, Elisa secured a place to live, a car, and a job, and she began the process of filing for divorce. Convinced that Trevor was out of her life for good, she felt optimism about the future. Encouraged by her newfound freedom, she even started exploring online dating and meeting new people. However, Elisa was wrong in her assumptions. After the divorce was finalized and custody arrangements were settled, she had to meet Trevor twice a week to exchange the children. These meetings were filled with noticeable tension, but no further aggressive outbursts occurred. By January 2017, Trevor seemed to have accepted the situation. A month later, he called Elisa, claiming there were some divorce-related documents she needed to sign. Trusting his recent calm demeanor, Elisa went to Trevor's house without any suspicion. At that time, Trevor's life was falling apart. He was facing possible imprisonment due to fraud allegations, and the image he had carefully crafted as a successful businessman and devoted family man also was crumbling. When Elisa arrived, Trevor tried to provoke her into a conversation, accusing her once again of infidelity and demanding a confession. In reality, there were no documents for her to sign. This was merely a ruse to draw her into a confrontation. When she attempted to leave, Trevor grabbed a machete, pressed it against her chest, and then held it to her throat. He kept her in this terrifying situation for several hours. Elisa eventually managed to calm him down and convinced him to let her go by promising not to call the police. Despite her promise, Elisa contacted emergency services as soon as she left. When the police arrived, Trevor denied everything, claiming she was lying and even threatened her life. Since there were no visible injuries on Elisa, the police believed his version of events. Following this incident, both Elisa and Trevor filed restraining orders against each other. Trevor began to take advantage of the situation to make the kids believe him, telling them that she was trying to send him to prison and take away his time with them. Trevor continued to build his narrative, blaming Elisa for the family's breakup. He told the children that he planned to reunite with them, and they eagerly believed him. The children were unaware of Elisa's living situation or the danger Trevor posed to her, as he had never directed his abuse at the children. This ignorance allowed Trevor to keep his growing children unaware of the true situation and the danger he represented to Elisa. Arden was manipulated by Trevor into becoming his informant. She spied on her mother and reported back to him. On March 11, 2017, Arden followed Trevor's instructions and informed Trevor when her mother went to bed with the younger children. She also left a window open for him. That night, Trevor arrived at Elisa's house with Landon, who stayed in the car, while leaving his 3-year-old son, Cooper, home alone, asleep in bed. He broke into the house, attacked Elisa, and took her phone to prevent her from contacting the authorities. He then dragged her into the living room, where the children ran out to check on their mother. Trevor ordered the children to return to their rooms and stay there until he allowed them to come out. Meanwhile, Arden remained in Trevor's car, watching over Landon. She believed that her parents were calmly talking and working out their problems, and that they would soon come out so they could all return to their dad's house and be a happy family again, just like before. But that outcome never came to pass. Around 4 a.m., Trevor sent his daughter a message saying the plan had changed. He instructed her to enter the house. When Arden came inside, Elisa saw her daughter and painfully realized that her daughter had sided with Trevor. Trevor then told Arden to take the other children to the car and drive them to his home. He assured her he would return later with Elisa in her car after resolving their reconciliation issues. The girl Arden trusted her father and agreed to help. While the inexperienced teenager desperately tried not to get into an accident on the road, Trevor tied his ex-wife to the bed. Over the next few hours, Trevor made wild claims about having millions of dollars in offshore accounts, preparing a yacht, and planning to escape into international waters. During this time, he repeatedly assaulted Elisa, using a weapon to intimidate her. He also forced her to take sedative medication, causing her to periodically fall asleep during the abuse and making it impossible for her to resist. At one point, Trevor used Elisa's phone to record a video in which he described his plan, in which he said, "I'm here with Elisa at her house, which I'm not allowed to be in." I woke Elisa up and held her against her will. Around 6 a.m., he tried to suffocate her by placing a pillow over her face and sitting on it. Desperate to survive, Elisa agreed to whatever he demanded, including going with him to the yacht and fleeing into international waters. Trevor eventually decided to leave, taking Elisa with him. She did not resist because she understood that Trevor was not in control of himself in these moments and was extremely dangerous. It was clearly a matter of life and death. They got into the car and started driving. About an hour later, Trevor parked near a supermarket on the outskirts of town to buy some supplies. While he was getting out of the car, Elisa managed to jump out, screaming for help. She ran toward a young man working at the supermarket, who had just stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. Before she could reach him, another man, large, muscular, and leaving the store with his shopping bags, grabbed her. He twisted her arms behind her back and forced her back into the car. "That man is Trevor," then got into the driver's seat and drove away. The supermarket employee, alarmed by what he had witnessed and suspecting a kidnapping, called 911. He provided authorities with the car's make, color, and license plate number. The car was quickly identified as that of Trevor Summers. A man had recently gone through a contentious divorce. Investigators quickly looked into Trevor and realized Elisa had previously filed several domestic violence complaints against him. This information painted a deeply troubling picture. Suspecting foul play, detectives decided to visit Elisa's home, where she lived with her children. However, when they arrived, the house was empty. The children were eventually found at Trevor's house, being cared for by Arden. When asked about their parents' whereabouts, none of the children could provide an answer. It became increasingly evident that Elisa had been kidnapped and was in grave danger. Understanding the sensitivity of the situation, the police opted to speak carefully with the children to avoid alarming them. Both parents' phones were turned off and untraceable, leaving the police with no immediate leads. Instead of scaring the children with suggestions that their mother may have been abducted by their father, officers gently questioned them to assess the situation. As the children described their parents' relationship, the police were shocked, especially considering the young ages of the witnesses. All the children recounted incidents of Trevor abusing Elisa. Though the children themselves were never physically harmed, they recalled seeing their mother tied up by Trevor, with her hands and feet bound for hours. That evening, Arden unintentionally helped him with his plans. While on the phone with her father, Trevor convinced Arden that he wanted to reconcile with Elisa and repair their relationship. He instructed Arden to leave a window open after everyone in the house had gone to bed, claiming it was part of a plan to surprise Elisa. Trusting her father's intentions, the naive girl complied. This gave Trevor access to the house, and without realizing his true motives, Arden unknowingly became complicit in his scheme. During the night, while the rest of the family was asleep, Trevor entered the bedroom where his ex-wife Elisa was sleeping. Her 7-year-old daughter, Bryn, and 5-year-old son, Grady, were also in the room. Elisa woke up to something wet dripping on her face and, still disoriented, sensed a threatening presence. Standing over her was Trevor, pressing a damp cloth against her face. Overcome with fear, Elisa screamed and struggled. At first, she couldn't identify who it was, but she soon realized it was Trevor. Frantically, she threw objects from her bedside table at him in an attempt to defend herself. However, Trevor grabbed her by the ankles, dragged her out of bed, and onto the floor. Her loud screams woke the children, who instinctively realized their father was attacking their mother. They cried and pleaded with him not to harm her. Trevor then dragged Elisa into another room, warning the children to stay out. What exactly happened to Elisa in that room remained a mystery to the children. Hours later, Arden took the children and drove them to their father's house. The police were continuing their search for Trevor. Based on the children's statements, detectives reconstructed the events and used the information to initiate a detailed search for Trevor, attempting to predict his escape routes. However, what the children didn't know was that Trevor had access to a yacht and millions of dollars, giving him a possible advantage in evading authorities. Before that, when leaving the supermarket, Trevor drove Elisa along rural roads near the Tampa Bay coastline, stopping occasionally in isolated areas. Enraged by her escape attempt, he retaliated by slashing her wrists with a razor and yelling at her. Eventually, he took her to a small, abandoned town, where they stayed for more than a day. During this time, Elisa saw Trevor writing suicide notes addressed to his children and the police. He continued to assault her throughout the ordeal. Despite the horrors she endured, Elisa focused on thoughts of her children and remained determined to survive for their sake. On the morning of March 13, Trevor and Elisa arrived in Little Harbor, a resort area where they had frequently vacationed as a family. Elisa immediately saw this as a bad omen because the location held significant meaning for Trevor, and she feared it might be where he planned to end both of their lives. Trevor parked the SUV behind a dumpster, moved to the back seat, and wrapped a rope around Elisa's neck. For several moments, he strangled her, and Elisa felt she was on the verge of death. Suddenly, Trevor let go of the rope and moved to the driver's seat. He sped off down a dirt road toward the beach. Unbeknownst to Trevor, police vehicles were closing in from behind. Then, when he realized he couldn't escape, He stopped the SUV, took out the razor he had previously used to threaten Elisa, and began slashing his own throat. Elisa screamed in terror, pleading with him to stop. The police surrounded the vehicle, forcing Trevor to drop the blade. They quickly helped Elisa escape from the horrific scene. Despite her injuries, Elisa survived. Both she and Trevor were taken to the nearest hospital for treatment. Trevor's injuries were not life-threatening. Elisa later gave a detailed account of the abuse she had endured at Trevor's hands. However, even then, Trevor denied any wrongdoing. He claimed Elisa had gone with him willingly, asked to be tied up, and consented to the violence as part of her interest in extreme intimacy. This blatant lie was dismissed by everyone. Trevor faced 11 charges, including attempted murder, kidnapping, abuse assault, and endangering the lives of his children. He denied all accusations, which delayed the trial. Additional setbacks arose from bureaucratic issues. Thankfully, Trevor was denied bail and remained in custody, allowing Elisa and her children to feel safer. Trevor spent 5 years in detention before preliminary hearings began in 2022. Prosecutors argued that his actions were premeditated and that Elisa would have died if the police had not intervened in time. In contrast, his defense attorney claimed the events were a coincidence caused by the stress Trevor had been under due to his wife's behavior. The defense even argued that Elisa had asked to be kidnapped and treated roughly. However, the prosecution's case was strong, supported by overwhelming evidence that disproved Trevor's claims. This included a video Trevor had recorded himself, handwritten confessions, suicide notes, and testimony from a store employee Elisa had approached for help. Physical evidence, such as the pillow he used to smother her and the ropes used to restrain her. Consequently, the defense's version sounded completely unconvincing. Elisa testified in court against her ex-husband Trevor, declaring she was no longer afraid of him and was determined to see him sentenced to life in prison for the 55 hours of torment he had inflicted on her. Despite this, the case was far from over, and much depended on the eloquence of Elisa, the prosecutor, and Trevor's attorney. During several hours of questioning, Elisa provided detailed accounts of the abuse she suffered before the kidnapping, including acts of torture, physical violence, and threats. Her testimony appeared to deeply resonate with the jury. Following her statements, Trevor underwent cross-examination. His testimony lasted over an hour, but as he spoke, the prosecution seemed increasingly confident in their case. It became evident that their position was stronger. Despite this, Trevor's defense attorney continued to search for weaknesses in the prosecution's arguments, aiming to minimize Trevor's culpability. Much of the defense's questioning focused on the abuse allegations. The attorney tried to convince the jury that everything had been consensual, thereby attempting to undermine the prosecution's case. They also tried to portray Elisa as manipulative and deceitful, claiming she had intentionally pushed Trevor to his breaking point, triggering his aggression and subsequent actions. Elisa and Trevor's children are 13-year-old Bryn and 19-year-old Arden, also participated in the hearings. Bryn had vivid and clear memories of the night her father assaulted her mother. The children's fear was unmistakable, and it became increasingly apparent that Trevor could no longer evade justice. When asked about the wound on his neck, Trevor claimed it was the result of emotional distress stemming from a stressful situation. The defense attorney emphasized that Trevor had no prior criminal record or history of violence. Nonetheless, the incident with Elisa severely undermined his credibility. The hearings lasted 3 days. In closing arguments, the defense attorney contended that the alleged kidnapping was merely Trevor's misguided attempt to reconcile with his wife, which had spiraled out of control. Elisa, however, firmly asserted that she had narrowly escaped being murdered and described Trevor as extremely dangerous. In a last-ditch effort, the defense questioned whether Elisa had been attacked in her home, pointing to the absence of blood, broken furniture, or other signs of a struggle. The claim that she had been tied up in a car in a supermarket parking lot was also contested. However, these arguments resembled the desperate attempts of a defense team that had become entangled in its own inconsistent versions of events. The jury deliberated for over 5 hours before reaching a verdict. Ultimately, they found Trevor guilty on all charges. For Elisa, justice was finally served. Overcome with emotion, she broke down in tears and fell into the arms of Jeff Matthewson, whom she had met shortly before the 2017 attack. Jeff had been a constant source of support throughout her ordeal. Elisa believed her ex-husband's aggression might have been fueled by his jealousy of Jeff, while others speculated that Trevor's actions stemmed from his despair over losing control of his life. In 2021, Elisa married Jeff, describing him as the person who made her feel truly safe for the first time. In later interviews, she spoke openly about the devastating impact Trevor had on her life and family, as well as the extreme and dangerous measures he had taken. Trevor's manipulative behavior, particularly involving their children, left lasting scars. Arden, one of their children, struggled to relearn how to trust others, a process made even harder by the cruelty they had witnessed from an early age. The court sentenced Trevor to life in a Florida state prison, along with an additional 224 years to be served consecutively, ensuring he will never be released. Despite this, Trevor remains determined to appeal the sentence and is actively pursuing that effort. The case of Susan McFarland. Susan McFarland was born on December 31, 1958. She is the youngest of 4 children and spent most of her childhood in the suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri, in the United States. During her high school years, she was very active, serving on the student council and participating in the French club. She also engaged in sports and prepared to go to college. After graduating from high school in 1977, she enrolled in college. Upon completing her studies, she earned a degree in accounting and began her career, working in various industries before becoming an accountant at a telephone company. Susan is a very active and entertaining person who maintains a lively lifestyle. She enjoys being around others, engaging in conversation, and having fun, which leads her to attend social dinners and many work-related events. People who know Susan praise her vibrant personality. In 1988, at one of these social gatherings, she met Richard McFarland, a stockbroker. Interestingly, Richard had attended the same school as Susan, but graduated 2 years earlier. Despite being at the same school, they had never met or known each other. Richard was active and loved sports. He played water polo, worked as a sound engineer and lighting technician for stage productions, and contributed to the school newspaper. In contrast to his girlfriend Susan, he was calmer and more reserved, which surprised many of her friends, as they thought the two seemed quite different. Despite these differences, their relationship continued to thrive. They married in 1989, and Susan had 3 sons. During this time, Susan took on the responsibility of raising the children while Richard faced many challenges. He struggled to maintain a steady job and was easily distracted by various get-rich-quick schemes. As network marketing companies became popular, Richard decided to join one. He sold high-priced household items, promoting their benefits to convince customers to purchase expensive products. Meanwhile, as Susan's children grew up, she landed a high-paying job. In 1998, her company moved its headquarters to San Antonio, Texas, which required the family to relocate. During this time, Susan's income surpassed Richard's, helping the family maintain financial stability. By 2000, Richard had tried many different careers, including brokerage sales and telemarketing, but none were successful. He eventually decided to focus on a new field: online sales. Although their relationship seemed stable, Susan McFarland was actually facing significant challenges. She considered divorce, and the couple even sought help from a family psychologist, as Richard did not want to abandon his wife and children. By the fall of 2002, the relationship had not improved, and Susan was feeling desperate and seriously contemplating divorce. She was hesitant because her husband threatened to take away their children and most of her savings. In late November, Susan spoke to a friend, expressing her frustration with Richard and stating that she could no longer stand him. She was upset by his constant problems at work, his immaturity, and his complete lack of responsibility. She felt that he was a failure who was holding the family back, and that they were only able to maintain a decent life thanks to her hard work and success. Susan felt she could not rely on him for anything. On November 25, 2002, Susan expressed to her friend that Richard was acting strangely. She even mentioned feeling paranoid, believing that someone might be tapping her phone and monitoring her computer. To help her relax, a friend invited Susan to go on vacation, but she declined because she was very busy. The next day, Susan did not show up for work and was absent for 3 days until Thanksgiving. At approximately 3 a.m. on November 29, 2002, a police patrol officer spotted a black Ford Explorer SUV parked in a vacant lot about a block from Susan's house. The car had been abandoned, with the keys still in the ignition. The officer ran the license plate and discovered that it belonged to Susan, but they were unable to contact her. They then contacted Richard to inform him about the car. During the call, Richard acted strangely and expressed that he did not want the police to come to his home. The officers decided to lock the car and take the keys. The officer followed procedure by locking the car and taking the keys to the station. That evening, Richard went to the city police station. Not only did he retrieve the keys, but he also reported to the police that his wife, Susan, was missing. He mentioned that the last time he saw her was on November 25 at approximately 9:30 p.m. Susan had planned to go on vacation with a friend, but according to Richard, she never returned. He also contacted her friends and learned that Susan did not attend a meeting they had arranged. After a brief conversation, the police took Richard to the parking lot where his wife's car was parked. He did not approach the car or look inside. Instead, he walked around the car several times for about 10 minutes. He eventually got into his car and drove with the police to the station, then went home. It was strange that he did not take the car even though he had the keys, which aroused suspicion. One of the officers decided to check the car. When he arrived at the parking lot, he inspected the outside and saw a drop of blood on the dashboard near the passenger seat. The officers also returned to talk to Richard again. During this time, they noticed that he had scratches on his knuckles and an injury to his pinky finger. While talking to the police, Richard appeared calm, but was evasive and did not answer most of their questions. However, he agreed to cooperate and allow them to search his home. The police found a few drops of blood on the bathroom wall and a stain on the bedroom door frame. A small lock of light-colored hair was found stuck in the bathroom door. The police also inspected Richard's car and found that the interior floor mats had been replaced, which raised suspicions. A few hours after the search for Susan began, a neighbor of Susan's who lived across the street contacted the police station. She provided valuable information. On November 26, 2002, she saw a white pickup truck parked near the driveway. The truck, later identified as Richard's, was parked there for unclear reasons. She tried to call him but was unsuccessful. The strange events continued when, around noon on November 29, 2002, she discovered an unfamiliar car in her garage. The car was unlocked. She checked the title and found a black wallet containing Richard's papers. There were also cans of gasoline, pesticides, and bags of charcoal, which appeared to have been brought there by Richard. Additionally, The neighbor reported that a pair of pruning shears she had used for gardening was missing. The neighbor called the police to report some incidents. When the police arrived, they discovered Richard's paperwork inside a car. Interestingly, when the police tried to check the license plate, they realized that the car had been stolen, prompting them to contact the owner. The man confirmed that his car had been stolen, but he did not understand why it had been taken. The police decided to examine the car. Inside, they found a map, 2 rolls of tissue paper on the passenger seat, packs of bandages, and a soda can, which appeared to be common items. In a second package, there were brown shoes, a blue shirt, a roll of plastic bags, duct tape, and another tissue. On the back seat, a wicker basket caught the attention of the police because it was similar to the one found on Susan's back porch. There was also a shovel in the back seat. However, the police were most concerned about a drop of blood on the rear bumper below the license plate. The police suspected that Richard might have stolen the car, but his actions were puzzling. Why would he leave his documents in a stolen car, and how did they end up in a neighbor's garage? At that time, there was no evidence of a violent crime. They believed that Susan was still alive and had simply disappeared. However, the police still thought that Richard had something to do with her disappearance. To find Susan, they needed to act quickly. The police contacted Susan's friend, who said she had not heard from Susan since November 25. On that day, Susan had confided in her about her plans for a divorce. She was determined to end her marriage and planned to begin the divorce process soon. Susan's friend reported that on Thanksgiving Day, Richard called her and asked to speak with Susan. However, Susan had not gone on vacation with her. During the call, Richard asked strange and inconsistent questions. News of Susan's disappearance reached her family, prompting them to travel to Texas to assist in the search. On their journey, they met several of Susan's close friends. Her co-workers reported that Susan was last seen on November 25. She was expected to come to work the following day but never arrived, which was unusual for her. Several co-workers also knew about her plans for a divorce. Witnesses said that divorce papers had been prepared on December 2, but Susan had intended to keep this information secret until then. A folder containing these divorce documents was later discovered in Susan's office. The police reviewed Richard's phone records and conversations and discovered that he had ordered a pizza on the evening of November 25. They contacted the delivery person, who reported that Richard had met him while wearing rubber gloves, which raised some suspicions. Additionally, the police gathered important information from the housekeeper who had visited the couple's home. Her next visit was scheduled for November 29. During an interview on December 5, the housekeeper expressed surprise at how unusually clean the house was. The family had never cleaned it themselves before, which caught her attention. It appeared that Richard had cleaned the house while wearing gloves. Furthermore, the housekeeper observed several other strange behaviors, particularly Richard's suspicious and distant attitude regarding his wife's disappearance. Richard's strange behavior continued to escalate. Neighbors reported seeing him wandering aimlessly for hours and driving around the neighborhood during the day. One day, he parked his car in front of his house and stared at one spot for about an hour before getting out of the car. He then returned with a lawnmower and began mowing a neighbor's lawn, despite the neighbor's attempts to stop him. By this time, the police were convinced that Susan was not only missing, but had also been attacked by her husband. It took some time to obtain a search warrant for the car, which was found in a neighbor's garage. Meanwhile, the police spoke to the true owner of the missing car, who shared a strange story. He had met a stranger in a park near a gas station who wanted to test drive the car. The stranger got into the car, but instead of driving around the parking lot, he disappeared. By the time the owner realized the car had been stolen, the thief had already fled. When shown a photo of Richard, the owner identified him as the thief. As the unusual circumstances surrounding Susan's disappearance began to attract the attention of her close friends, everyone turned to Richard to find out what was going on. However, he kept giving different accounts. His version of events seemed to change constantly. Richard himself acted strangely, and even asked Susan's best friend what the police had found in the car from the neighbor's garage, seemingly forgetting that he had left some items there. Richard claimed that Susan had been with him at the gas station that night and that she was the one who had stolen the car. However, the car's owner verified this account and noted that no woman was present at the time. Unfortunately, Richard has yet to provide any useful information regarding Susan's disappearance. Richard was still on the run when Susan's family began distributing flyers on December 4. Volunteers and search parties, including dogs, scoured the city, focusing on the area where Susan's abandoned car had been found. Interestingly, Richard seemed unconcerned about his wife's fate. He repeatedly told Susan's family that she had likely run away. However, Susan's relatives were skeptical of his claims, knowing the details of their life together. All of Susan's belongings were left at home, and it was clear that she would not abandon her children. Despite this, Richard stuck to his story and refused to communicate with Susan's family. He even prevented her family from seeing the children. Susan's family was aware that she had been planning to divorce Richard for about a year, which heightened their fears that he might be involved in her disappearance. However, no one took this possibility seriously at first, and everyone remained hopeful of finding Susan safe. On December 5, DNA samples were collected from Richard for analysis, but the search for Susan did not yield any results until December 13. The police decided to return to Richard's home, and after 8 hours of investigation, they recovered 2 guns, ammunition, a computer, and some documents for further examination. When asked about the divorce proceedings, Richard mentioned that the problems in their relationship had begun a long time ago. He believed they were moving toward separation, but claimed he had no idea that Susan had planned to give him divorce papers on December 2. The police later discovered that Susan intended to evict Richard from the house she had purchased herself. Furthermore, Susan's family revealed that her mother had reported someone hacking her voicemail and email at work just days before Susan went missing. This raised suspicions about Richard. By the time the police investigated further, a substantial amount of incriminating evidence had been collected, but they decided not to disclose it immediately. They hoped this strategy would lead to Richard being caught in a lie. As time passed without a ransom demand from the kidnappers, the possibility of Susan's abduction was eliminated. On December 17, the police released an official report naming Richard as a suspect in Susan's murder. The police chief stated that there was enough circumstantial evidence to suspect Richard of kidnapping and murdering his wife. However, Susan's body had still not been found. Richard, who had hired 2 lawyers by this time, chose not to cooperate with the investigation. Meanwhile, search efforts continued, with police dogs, officers on horseback, and aircraft searching from the air. Several volunteer organizations sent teams to assist, but these searches also yielded no clues. As of December 31, the search continued with no sign of her. She had not been found and had been missing for over a month, suggesting that the chances of her being returned safely were slim. The police were awaiting the results of DNA tests to determine whose blood was found in a stolen car and in Richard's home. It was believed that the blood belonged to Susan. In early January 2003, the police station received an anonymous tip, which led to a large-scale search of the city park. Unfortunately, the tip was false, and as of January 13, there had been no progress. On January 14, a new witness contacted the police, reporting suspicious activity at a farm located 30 kilometers from Susan's home. The witness had seen an unfamiliar car drive down the road and then turn around slowly, as if the driver was unsure of where to go. When the witness approached to offer help, the driver accelerated and drove away. This behavior was very strange, especially since the area was very remote, making encounters with unknown vehicles unusual. The witness later discovered that part of his fence had been thrown into a pile and set on fire. He found several suspicious objects in the pile of destroyed fence. He informed the police that the unknown vehicle had appeared in the week after Thanksgiving, which coincided with the time of Susan's disappearance. The police investigated the area and found the wrapper of a rare Italian popsicle that Richard liked. After a short search, they discovered an old homemade trailer that had been burned. Inside, they found a human body that was so charred that the gender and identity of the body could not be determined. The body was then sent for forensic analysis for further investigation. Additionally, plant and soil samples were collected to compare with particles found on Richard's shoes and shovel. Richard was eventually arrested and initially charged with carjacking, attempted witness bribery, and tampering with evidence. His bail was set at $450, but he remained in jail because he could not pay it. Child Protective Services removed Richard's 3 sons from the home, and Susan's sister subsequently filed for custody. The eldest son, aged 11, was placed with Susan's family, while the 2 younger boys were placed with a foster family. Tests later confirmed the identity of the body as Susan's. The medical examiner's report indicated that she died from blunt force trauma to the head. On January 18, Richard was charged with first-degree murder. However, the prosecutor's office announced that it did not plan to pursue the death penalty. Given the seriousness of the crime, it is likely that he will receive a life sentence. Susan's family confronted Richard, but this only made them more upset. They had hoped to see remorse and regret from him. Instead, they were met with indifference and a blank look on Richard's face. Despite having killed his wife and leaving their young children with another family, Richard remained completely calm and showed no remorse. The hearing began on February 9, 2004. Richard reached a plea deal with the prosecution, admitting to murdering his wife. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison and was paroled after serving 19 years. In his confession, he stated that he killed Susan when he learned she wanted a divorce because he could not bear the thought of her leaving him with nothing. After the crime, he took Susan's remains to a remote area and burned them. The case of Heather Garaus. Shauna Nelson has been a 911 switchboard employee for about 13 years. She is known for being calm and professional. Shauna and Greeley Ignacio Garaus met while playing on the same baseball team, where they got to know each other and even flirted. However, there is one important detail. Shauna has been a wife and mother of 3 for many years. She is married to Weld Ken Nelson, who also works for the police department. Despite this, Shauna believes that her marriage is over, and she no longer feels attracted to her husband. Her relationship with Greeley began when her marriage was falling apart. During this difficult time, she found herself attracted to him, and their friendship quickly turned into love. However, Greeley was also married. His wife, Heather Garaus, was someone he met during his senior year of college. They were affectionate and supportive of each other, and their initial attraction blossomed into a loving marriage. Greeley seemed like the perfect partner, which was important to Heather because she had suffered abuse in a previous relationship. Early on, Greeley witnessed the abuse in Heather's relationship with her ex-boyfriend, who began stalking her. Fortunately, Greeley stepped in and quickly resolved the situation, chasing the stalker away. He helped Heather put an end to the abuse she was enduring. Just a few months into their relationship, Greeley proposed to Heather. She accepted his proposal, but with one important condition. She required his unwavering loyalty and warned that if he cheated on her, they would end their relationship forever. Soon after finishing school, the newlyweds began their careers. Heather worked at a bank while going to school, and now she could devote more time to her work. She applied for a management position and quickly began climbing the career ladder. Within a few years, Heather became the head of the bank where she worked. Greeley was a police officer and was heavily involved in city management. He balanced his dedication to his job with his love for his wife. 5 years after their wedding, they finally welcomed their first daughter. Heather's life seemed stable, but fate had many challenges in store for the couple. The first challenge came in 1997, when Heather's father suddenly died of a heart attack. She struggled to cope with the loss, but that was only the beginning. A week later, Heather's mother was diagnosed with cancer. Despite early detection, the medical technology of the time was not effective in treating it. Despite the efforts of doctors and various therapies, the disease progressed, and Heather's mother passed away in 2003, unable to overcome the illness. After these events, Heather fell into a deep depression. She had always been very close to her parents and never expected to lose them so suddenly and at such a young age. She struggled to cope with the loss. Managing household chores had previously come easily to her, but now it was difficult. Her husband, Greeley, tried to support her by being understanding, spending more time with their daughter, and helping with the housework. However, despite his efforts, he felt stuck and could not make progress for several months. Greeley was busy with his work at the police station and could only attend to his housework in his spare time. Over time, frustration began to build. The couple sought the help of a therapist who prescribed medication to help Heather overcome her depression and regain focus on her life. Gradually, the therapy began to work, and she started to participate in her normal activities again. However, the stress of the past few months took its toll on their relationship. Greeley, feeling overwhelmed, began to seek comfort outside of their marriage. Greeley increasingly stayed late at work, seemingly avoiding his family. It was during this time that he met Shauna and Weld after a baseball game. Greeley and Shauna began a secret romantic relationship. It seemed they did not hide their affair well, as almost everyone at the police station knew about it. From the start, Greeley and Shauna's relationship was tumultuous. Shauna had a hot temper and often had difficulty controlling her emotions. This led to aggressive outbursts during their arguments, regardless of who was around. The main source of conflict was Greeley's marriage. He did not want to leave his wife, while Shauna pressured him to be with her. She declared that she would leave her husband for Greeley at any time. After 6 months of this troubled relationship, things took a turn when Shauna announced that she was pregnant with Greeley's child. Greeley denied paternity, believing that her husband was the father. However, Shauna argued that her husband had undergone a vasectomy after they had 3 children, leaving him infertile. She insisted that Greeley was the father. Greeley began pressuring Shauna to have an abortion. It was clear that Greeley had no intention of leaving his wife for her. Shauna, feeling trapped in this situation, realized that her husband Weld would leave her if he found out she was pregnant. She eventually felt forced to have an abortion, a choice she would regret for a long time. However, Shauna could not learn from the experience. In mid-2005, she became pregnant again with Greeley's child, and this time refused to have an abortion. This new pregnancy prompted Shauna to try to keep Greeley close to her and the child. In response, Greeley tried to distance himself from Shauna. She now planned to expose Greeley's infidelity to his wife, Heather. She believed that if Heather found out the truth, she would leave Greeley, allowing him to be with Shauna. Shauna's first encounter with Greeley's wife, Heather, turned into a nightmare for Shauna. She followed Heather in a store, then approached Heather, boasted about her intimate relationship with Greeley, and claimed that Heather's husband loved Shauna. Shauna's inappropriate behavior backfired. Even after she admitted to cheating and having an affair with Greeley, Heather still did not believe her. Heather considered her a scammer. Shauna did not stop there. She continued to contact Heather via phone, text, and social media. Heather blocked her number, but it did not work. Shauna followed her and showed up unexpectedly to see Heather around town. Heather was distressed and often shared her concerns with her family and husband about Shauna's disturbing behavior. Unfortunately, Greeley was unable to intervene, as discussions with Shauna were no longer productive. Heather was confused and scared by these situations. Greeley promised to fix the problem, but his attempts to communicate with Shauna did not go well. She continued to act increasingly brazen and obsessive. To the surprise of those around her, she even showed up uninvited at a party at Greeley's house. At this point, their secret relationship had lasted about 2 years. All of Greeley's attempts to end things with Shauna caused her to become depressed and reckless. Fortunately, she was eventually kicked out of the party. The joy did not last long. The next morning, Shauna continued to visit the Greeley house. Early that morning, she knocked on the door while Greeley was still sleeping. Even so, she insisted on knocking to wake him up. Heather tried to calm down the panicked Shauna and even threatened to call the police, unaware that Shauna also worked in law enforcement. Eventually, Heather became so confused that she felt the need to gain a better understanding of the situation. She worried not only for her own safety, but also for her family, especially her daughter, fearing that Shauna might harm them. A major conflict broke out when Greeley finally woke up. He tried to calm Heather down, promising to work things out with Shauna. Meanwhile, Shauna's husband, Weld, was unaware of her infidelity, despite also working in the police force. His curiosity was piqued when he accidentally glanced at her diary on the table in their bedroom. As he read through it, Weld discovered details of Shauna's affair with Greeley, a painful revelation for him. She described in detail how Weld had lost all attraction to her, and that Greeley was not her first lover. She had been unfaithful for a long time. When the truth was revealed, Weld was shocked and angry to learn that the affair had lasted for 2 years, and that Heather and Greeley had even been intimate in their family home and car. Weld wanted a divorce and was open about it. During an argument about the affair, Shauna revealed that she was pregnant by her lover. She tried to play on Weld's emotions by mentioning his infertility and claiming that she just wanted another child, which caused her to seek comfort outside their marriage. However, Weld was not moved by her attempts to manipulate him and told her to leave the house. This put Shauna in a difficult position. She did not want to leave Weld, and the thought of being a single mother was terrifying. She decided to contact Greeley, the father of her unborn child. After the marriage ended, she hoped to reconnect with Greeley. She excitedly shared with Greeley that she was divorcing her husband and had decided to keep their child. She ignored Greeley's hesitation about the divorce and repeatedly expressed her desire for him to start a family with her. At this point, Greeley only wanted to reconcile with his wife Heather. He no longer valued Shauna and insisted on having an abortion. Shauna was angry because she felt unsupported and did not expect Greeley to turn his back on her. Realizing that Greeley would not meet her expectations, she chose to contact Weld, her ex-husband. Unfortunately, he was hurt and did not want to talk to her during this difficult time. Feeling lonely, Shauna sought support from her best friend, Michelle Moore. Michelle and Shauna had been friends since childhood and had a close relationship, as they both worked in law enforcement, with Michelle being a deputy sheriff. Shauna often confided in Michelle about her feelings. Michelle encouraged Shauna to mend her relationship with her husband, Weld. However, Shauna would not give up on her plans to start a family with Greeley. She thought about their future and considered his wife the main obstacle to her happiness, which she planned to deal with later. Following Michelle's advice, Shauna reconciled with Weld. Despite their past problems, Weld forgave her and agreed to adopt her unborn child as his own. In March 2006, Shauna gave birth to a baby boy. Greeley tried to keep this a secret from his wife by lying. However, Heather had long suspected Greeley of having an affair. Shauna's behavior was not only strange, but it also raised more serious concerns. Greeley was skilled at avoiding direct questions, making it difficult for Heather to confront him. That spring, while they were out for a walk, Heather pressed him to tell the truth. Greeley finally admitted that he had been having an affair with Shauna Nelson, who had been following them. Despite this confession, he claimed that they had ended their relationship, but this was not true. Greeley continued to have an affair with Shauna, despite her stalking, which only intensified her feelings for him. He found Shauna's actions disturbing, but he did not end the relationship. Greeley was at a loss as to how to handle the situation. Heather was surprised to learn that the affair had lasted for a long time. Greeley later revealed that Shauna was pregnant with his second child and had chosen not to abort the baby. He attempted to rationalize Shauna's behavior by saying that her husband was infertile and that she wanted to become pregnant. Heather did not make a hasty decision. She had said before that if he were unfaithful, she would leave him immediately. However, she had now changed her mind and did not want to leave the man she had been married to for nearly 10 years. Greeley realized that his situation with Shauna had spiraled out of control. He sought Heather's forgiveness and vowed not to cheat on her again, hoping to save their marriage. They agreed to put the matter aside for the time being. Regardless, Heather could not allow her husband to maintain a relationship with Shauna. Heather felt that her husband needed to resolve this issue as soon as possible and that he had to cut ties with Shauna and the child. After all of this, Heather felt hurt and betrayed by the husband she had trusted. After their encounter, she called her family to express her frustration in detail, hoping to find comfort. Her relatives supported her desire to mend her relationship with her husband. To do this, she planned to seek guidance from a psychologist to help save their family. Greeley had to completely cut off contact with Shauna, even at work. That evening, he called Shauna on speakerphone to break up with her while his wife was present. Shauna was devastated by the breakup and began bombarding Heather with text messages and calls. Her messages included alarming threats and violent images, blaming Heather for her problems and ignoring the fact that she had interfered in someone else's family when Greeley no longer wanted to be with her. Shauna's behavior became increasingly erratic, culminating in a tragic incident on the evening of January 23, 2007. A witness came to the police station after witnessing an attack. Heather initially spoke to her co-workers in the parking lot before walking to their car. Suddenly, a man dressed in black and wearing a mask appeared and approached Heather. The attacker raised a weapon, ordered Heather to her knees, and yelled that Heather had ruined her life. 2 shots were then fired, and Heather was hit and fell to the ground. The dressed in black quickly fled the scene. When police arrived, Heather was unconscious but still breathing. She had head and chest injuries and was in critical condition, so she was taken to the intensive care unit. Tragically, she later died at the hospital. Police quickly identified Heather as the wife of one of their employees. They launched an immediate investigation, beginning with an interview with a witness, a co-worker of Heather's. The witness reported that the attacker was dressed in black, making it difficult to see their faces. The witness was unable to determine the attacker's gender, as it was difficult to tell from a distance whether they were a woman or a man. After the shooting, the attacker quickly left in a pickup truck, but the witness did not see the license plate number. Greeley received a call that day while he was with his daughter, waiting for his wife to return from work. He was shocked by the tragic news, as he never expected something so devastating to happen. He provided the investigation with important clues that could aid in the search. Despite Shauna's suspicious behavior, he could not believe that she would kill Heather. The officers were deeply affected by the incident. They checked Shauna's and Greeley's cars. Based on the description, Shauna's husband Weld's car matched the one the suspect had used to flee. The officers quickly went to their home. When they arrived, Weld spoke to the officers and stated that he had not used his car on the day of the murder, but that Shauna had driven it out several times. They decided to track the pickup truck using surveillance camera footage. The footage showed the truck leaving the crime scene and heading toward a winery located on the edge of town. A driver got out of the truck, dressed entirely in black, and his face was not visible. However, the police noticed an important detail. The driver was barefoot, despite the snow and cold. While checking the area between the two locations, they discovered discarded clothing and shoes that clearly belonged to a man. They quickly tested for gunpowder residue and confirmed its presence at the crime scene, along with tire tracks from the suspect's car. The police suspected that Weld could be a potential suspect. However, he had a solid alibi, as he was working at the time of the attack, which led to increased suspicion of Shauna. The liquor store owner reported that a barefoot woman had come in that evening, and he recognized her as Shauna. When the police spoke to Shauna, she said she had been having a headache all day and had gone out to buy alcohol. In her statement, she explained that when she got to the store, she realized she had forgotten her wallet, which was why she seemed different. Shauna intended to buy alcohol to relieve her headache, but when she got to the store, she had to leave empty-handed because she had no money. When she stepped outside, her husband Weld suddenly appeared and urged her to get out of the pickup, saying that things looked bad. At that point, Shauna's headache intensified and she passed out, not remembering anything until the next morning. Shauna's story lacked credibility, and the police suspected that she was lying. During the investigation, it was discovered that Shauna's friend, Assistant Chief of Police Michelle Moore, had actively helped her. The reason for Michelle's animosity toward Heather is still unclear. According to Michelle's confession, she helped Shauna because she was her best friend. Michelle assisted in planning the attack on Heather and provided advice on how to cover up their actions, almost like a consultation based on her police expertise. They planned and executed the crime in a very clever manner. Both women were arrested and charged with Heather's murder. Michelle Moore received a 10-year prison sentence for her role in the crime. Although she could have faced a much longer sentence, her sentence was significantly reduced due to a plea agreement and her admission of guilt. During the trial, Michelle stated that over the years, she and Shauna had developed a close friendship. Shauna confided in her about her problems, so Michelle was very understanding of the challenges Heather's family faced, especially the troubled relationship between Shauna and Greeley. Throughout these difficult times, Michelle was always there to support Shauna, especially when Greeley contacted Shauna while he was with his wife, calling to break up with her. Initially, Shauna couldn't believe what he said and thought he was just acting. However, she soon realized that the conversation meant Greeley had decided to return to his wife and was no longer interested in Shauna. This finally caused Shauna to lose her temper. She turned back to Michelle. Meanwhile, Shauna manipulated Michelle into turning against Heather. It was clear that Shauna used manipulative tactics with people to get what she wanted. Michelle fell into Shauna's trap and decided to help her. Michelle ended up playing a key role in planning the crime. Thanks to Michelle, Shauna had full access to forensic science resources and expert guidance. Michelle advised Shauna on how to act and how to use the internet to avoid detection. As a result, Shauna quickly stopped making any suspicious online requests, even from her work devices. During questioning, Shauna pretended to be surprised when she was informed of the murder charge, claiming that she had no memory of the shooting. However, there was substantial evidence against her. Prior to the hearing, Shauna was placed behind bars. The trial was moved to a nearby county due to heavy media coverage before the trial and concerns that the jury might already know the details of the case. This move was made to ensure that both the prosecution and defense attorneys were fair. In February 2008, The prosecutor and defense attorney addressed the jury. The prosecution alleged that Shauna had affairs with married police officers. However, it was her obsession with Greeley that stood out. She became so infatuated that she nearly divorced him, became pregnant, and eventually killed his wife, who had separated them. Several witnesses gave compelling testimony. One police officer claimed that Shauna had expressed her deep hatred for Heather, stating that during practice at the shooting range, she had visualized Heather's face as a target. Shauna vehemently denied her guilt and tried to blame others. The prosecutor presented a clear timeline of events, supported by numerous witnesses and evidence. It appeared that Shauna had planned the violent crime in advance and intended to frame her husband, Weld. She used Weld's car and clothes, taken from the laundry basket, which contained his DNA and would help conceal her identity. The prosecution argued that Shauna wanted to remove two obstacles that would prevent her from being with Greeley: her husband and Greeley's wife, Heather Garouse, because her husband might want to divide the assets in a divorce. After some deliberation, the jury found Shauna Nelson guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to life in prison without parole. Greeley, who had gained custody of Shauna's daughter after Heather's death. The case of Scott Koval. Scott Koval, 22 years old, and Jane Reth, 20 years old, met in 1984 when they both enrolled at Laser College in Riverside, California. Scott was studying biology, while Jane was pursuing a degree in physical therapy. Initially, they were just friends, but after a few months their friendship developed into a romantic relationship. From the very beginning, their love affair went through many ups and downs. They often quarreled and then reconciled. Sometimes they resolved their conflicts in public, and their friends thought these quarrels were not too serious, so they did not intervene. After their first year, Scott decided to drop out of college and move to Alaska to pursue a career in fishing. Meanwhile, Jane remained focused on her studies, determined to achieve her goal of becoming a physical therapist. Despite the distance, they maintained their relationship through phone calls and letters. Surprisingly, they had very few arguments while apart, and their relationship seemed to strengthen. In 1987, Scott attended Jane's graduation in California. Right after she received her diploma, he proposed, expressing his desire for her to move to Alaska with him. Jane happily accepted the proposal and quickly began packing to move to Sitka, Alaska. In the summer of 1987, Jane relocated from California, where summers are dry and winters are rainy, to Sitka, where summers are cool and winters are mild but wet. At that time, Scott had changed jobs several times and was working as a fisherman at a large canning plant. He also had a part-time job at a pulp mill and occasionally engaged in commercial fishing. They lived in a small trailer on the outskirts of Sitka. Jane focused on household chores, but had not made any friends in the new city. Scott often worked late, leaving Jane alone for long periods. After a few months in their new home, Scott and Jane's relationship became strained, leading to arguments. Nevertheless, in October 1987, 25 years old Scott and 23 years old Jane were officially married in Alaska. 4 months later, in February 1988, they moved to San Diego, California, to meet Scott's parents and have a lavish wedding. After the wedding reception, they returned to Alaska, where they quickly faced major issues. Scott lost his job at the cannery after getting caught smoking at work, which left the family without any income. This financial strain led to frequent arguments between them. Jane often feels frustrated with Scott, but she doesn't realize that she is going through a lot of trouble living away from her family and friends. In March 1988, Jane reached out to her mother-in-law, Rita Koval, to express her disappointment, stating that she thought she would be happy, but found that marriage was very difficult. Rita, being a wise and experienced woman, advised Jane that marriage required compromise and effort to maintain a healthy relationship. Rita called her son, Scott, every week. Although he was not close to his mother and rarely complained, Rita sensed problems in her son's marriage. She worried that Scott had rushed into marriage and feared that constant arguments might lead to a divorce. Little did she know that the end of her son's marriage would be much worse than she had anticipated. On April 12, 1988, Rita called her son Scott to wish him a happy 26th birthday. Unfortunately, Scott did not answer the call. Rita understood that her son worked a lot and often wasn't home, so they rarely spoke and sometimes went long periods without communication. After his birthday, Rita tried calling him a few more times, but each time there was no answer. She had sent him a small check as a birthday gift, but he never cashed it. Nearly a month later, in early May 1988, Rita called Scott's number again, only to find it had been disconnected. This raised her concerns, prompting her to urgently search for her son. Rita and her husband called all of Scott's friends in California and discovered he hadn't been in touch with anyone for about a month since his birthday. In Alaska, Scott had very few co-workers because they usually worked for only a few months to earn money before quitting. This left Rita and her husband feeling confused and worried. They began to think that perhaps Scott had left to escape issues with his wife, Jane, and was hiding out in another city. They were reluctant to entertain the thought that something serious might have happened to their only son. Almost a month after Scott went missing, on Mother's Day, May 8, Rita received a lovely postcard. The postcard was signed by Jane, and the envelope was postmarked from San Bernardino, California. Scott's parents thought that their son and Jane might have been visiting her family there. However, they found it strange that Scott, who rarely visited Jane's house, had not informed them and did not want to meet with them. Jane's family was just a few hours' drive from his parents' home. After 3 more weeks, on May 30, with no idea where their son was, Scott's parents decided to call the Sitka police for help. During the call, Rita expressed concern that Scott may have left home voluntarily, but she was very worried. Any parent would be anxious if their child was missing. The police then initiated a search for Scott. A week later, on June 8, they released a newspaper article with a photo of missing 26-year-old Scott Covell, but received no responses. No one called in with information, and there were no replies to the newspaper ad. Following that, police visited the house where Scott and Jane had been living. They noticed that Jane's belongings were gone, but Scott's items remained untouched. The inside of the home was clean and organized, with nothing out of place, and authorities found no evidence or clues about Scott's disappearance. In June 1988, detectives attempted to reach Jane. They searched for her in Sitka, Alaska, and her hometown of San Bernardino, California, but she was nowhere to be found. Despite their efforts, she was never located. Meanwhile, police discovered Scott's truck abandoned in the airport parking lot in Sitka. However, they learned that he had not purchased any plane tickets and had not flown anywhere under his own name. Because Scott is an adult, he has the legal right to disappear, and law enforcement has no obligation to search for him. It was possible that Scott used fake documents to buy a plane ticket and travel to a location where he could remain hidden. By the end of summer, Scott's parents received a letter addressed to them from Jane. The contents of the 3-page letter were unclear. Jane wrote that Scott had packed his belongings and left home, but she had no idea where he had gone. She claimed that he had not contacted her. In the letter, she stated that Scott was using illegal drugs, which caused him to have negative thoughts. She believed that this was the reason he decided to run away in search of a better life. At the end of the letter, she provided her new phone number for Scott's parents to reach her if necessary. The investigation into Scott's case had hit a dead end. No one had found him yet, and it was unknown whether he was alive or dead. 6 years later, in 1994, Scott's parents announced that their son had died. His mother, Rita, revealed that she had harbored resentment towards her daughter-in-law, Jane, feeling that Jane had robbed her of her only son. Meanwhile, Jane moved to Southern California, found work as a physical therapist, and became actively involved in the community of her local Seventh-day Adventist Church, an international Protestant organization. She donated a significant amount of money to the church and participated in missionary work in Nepal and China. At age 35, Jane met a man named Chris Redd, a jet pilot. After a year of dating, they got married in 2000 and held a church wedding ceremony. Jane then moved with her husband to the Chicago suburbs, where she worked as a physical therapist. Here, she was loved by her neighbors and colleagues. However, after 5 years, Jane's second marriage failed. In 2005, they separated and began divorce proceedings. Chris moved to California, while Jane remained in Illinois. In 2007, 2 years after their separation, Chris applied to the Roman Catholic Church for an annulment of his marriage to Jane. The church takes marriage annulment seriously and hired a detective to investigate both Chris's and Jane's backgrounds. During the investigation, Chris revealed to the detective that Jane had confessed to him that she killed her first husband, Scott Coville, and that she had never been caught or punished for it. The detective received this information and called the Sitka, Alaska Police Department. They discovered that Jane's first husband, Scott, had been murdered. The police asked Chris to talk to Jane again about Scott's murder and to record their conversation. Chris agreed and successfully recorded a conversation in which Jane once more confessed to murdering Scott. This was a significant development in the case. However, a taped confession alone was not enough to proceed with a prosecution, as Scott's body was never found and there was no physical evidence to prove the murder. Detectives revisited the house where Scott and Jane had lived 20 years earlier and conducted a thorough search. This time, their investigation was meticulous. In the master bedroom, under the carpet, they found a large black stain and took a sample. The stain was later confirmed to be blood. However, because Scott had disappeared 20 years earlier and left no trace, comparisons were difficult. Fortunately, his mother, Rita, had kept his baby teeth after they were removed by a dentist during his childhood. Forensic scientists compared the DNA from the baby teeth with the DNA from the blood found, and the results matched perfectly. Then, Jane Reth was charged with his murder and arrested on January 13, 2010. At that time, she was living a quiet life in Oswego, New York, where she worked and was actively involved in her church, helping people with disabilities. Her neighbors were shocked when police handcuffed her and took her away. They had no idea about her past. During questioning, Jane denied any involvement in Scott's disappearance. However, when presented with evidence, including audio recordings and photographs of the blood found, she confessed to everything. Jane said that on the evening of April 12, 1988, which was Scott's birthday, they were lying in bed and talking. During their conversation, Scott revealed that he was unhappy in their marriage and wanted a divorce. This upset Jane. After he fell asleep, she took out a weapon and attacked him while he was lying in bed. His death was immediate, but what followed was even more horrifying. Jane spent a long time contemplating how to dispose of his body, and then she had a disturbing idea. She placed the parts in black bags and disposed of them in various trash bins around the city. At that time, Sitka had a waste management system that incinerated garbage, making it nearly impossible to recover Scott's remains. He would never be found. Jane recounted that after distributing the bags into various bins, she returned to the trailer, meticulously cleaned up any traces, and then packed up her belongings. She got into Scott's truck and drove to Sitka Airport. There, she left the truck in the parking lot and flew to California to stay with her parents. Jane misled her relatives and friends by asserting that Scott had left her and that she had no idea where he was or who he was with. She wished her family life would be like a fairy tale, but the reality was completely different. Not long after, a trial for Jane Reth began. She faced a sentence of up to 70 years in prison. She attempted to avoid charges of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence by accepting a plea deal for second-degree murder. In court, she described the incident of that horrific night. She acknowledged that she and Scott frequently had disputes during which he would become physically aggressive. She didn't know how to seek help in an unfamiliar city. However, there was no evidence that Scott abused her. The prosecutor stated in court that not everyone, even the most violent criminals, could commit the heinous acts that Jane did. He described her as calculating and heartless, lying to relatives and writing letters pretending to be him to his parents. In another letter, Jane accused Scott of using drugs, claiming that this led him to leave home. However, his mother, Rita, testified that her son had never been addicted to drugs, seldom drank alcohol, and rarely smoked. She acknowledged that their relationship wasn't very close, and he didn't share his family problems with her. However, she sensed that he was troubled. She also knew that Scott was unhappy in his marriage and wanted a divorce from Jane. Jane's lawyer requested a 15-year sentence, arguing that she had confessed to her crimes and sought forgiveness. He noted that she had performed good deeds, helped those in need, and engaged in missionary work abroad for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. One of Jane's colleagues testified that she was very caring and responsive, frequently donated to charities, and always offered her support to others. In her final statement in court, Jane said that she did not know how to make amends for the wrongs she had done to her husband, Scott. She expressed deep regret for her actions and mentioned that she had thought about them for many years. Jane made it clear that she was not trying to justify herself, acknowledging her guilt and true repentance. The judge noted that Jane had acted in a cold and calculated manner. On March 3, 2011, Jane Reth was found guilty and sentenced to 25 to 55 years in prison, with no chance of parole until January 2034, when she would be 70 years old. Scott's mother, Rita Colville, shared that she felt indifferent toward Jane when she heard her confession in court. Rita had always believed Jane was responsible for her son's disappearance. For 10 years she hated Jane, but gradually realized that it was pointless and began to feel indifferent instead of hateful. Rita believed that God would punish Jane, no matter where she was. For 22 years, Rita lived in sorrow, knowing her only son was likely dead. Yet, she always sought the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Scott's father passed away in 2004 without ever knowing the truth about their son's fate. It is heartbreaking to think that a mother will never be able to lay her only son to rest, who was born and died on the same day. The case of Jennifer Kess. Jennifer was an American woman from Orlando, Florida. She attended the University of Central Florida in Orlando, graduating in 2003 with a degree in finance. In 2006, 24-year-old, she seemed to have everything going for her. She had a thriving personal life, was excelling at work. She currently works as a financial manager at Central Florida Investments timeshare company in Ocoee, and recently purchased a condo in Orlando. According to her best friend, Jennifer was always cautious about her safety and carried pepper spray with her at all times. On Sunday, January 22, 2006, Jennifer returned from a vacation with her boyfriend, Rob Allen. They had been dating for about a year. Since Rob lived approximately 3 hours away from Jennifer's apartment in Orlando, they could only see each other on weekends. On Monday, January 23, Jennifer returned to work after her vacation. That day, she called her mother, Joyce Kessie, to talk about her trip. Joyce later said Jennifer sounded happy and refreshed during the call. After work, Jennifer went home and called her boyfriend around 10 p.m., The conversation did not go well. Jennifer felt upset, as she believed Rob didn't love her enough. She was frustrated that they lived far apart and could only see each other on weekends. She told him that this arrangement wasn't enough for her. The two argued, and the call ended on a bad note. Rob could not have imagined that this would be their final conversation. The next morning, after Rob called her early in the morning as usual, his call went straight to her voicemail. Jennifer didn't show up to work and stopped answering her phone, which was highly unusual. Concerned, her co-workers contacted her parents, who immediately became alarmed. On their way to Jennifer's apartment, her parents called local hospitals and reported her disappearance to the police. When Jennifer's parents arrived at her apartment, everything appeared normal. The apartment manager used a spare key to unlock the door, and they found her suitcase in a clean and tidy living space, as if a maid had just cleaned it. However, the bathroom was noticeably disorganized. Jennifer's mother explained that Jennifer often rushed out in the mornings, leaving the bathroom messy. Inside, they found scattered cosmetics, curling iron clamps, a wet crumpled towel, and water droplets everywhere. Jennifer's bedtime t-shirt was on the floor, all suggesting she had spent the night there. Strangely, her purse, keys, and cell phone were missing. It seemed evident that Jennifer had stayed at home the night before, woke up, started her usual morning routine, left the apartment, locked the door, and then disappeared. Jennifer's brother, Logan Kesey, began questioning nearby construction workers to find out if they had seen Jennifer or noticed anything suspicious that morning. However, the workers refused to cooperate or share any information, which fueled Logan's suspicion that they might know something, but were unwilling to speak. The Kesey family grew increasingly frustrated with the police, who initially showed little urgency. Authorities believed Jennifer might have had an argument with her boyfriend and left on her own, expecting her to return soon. Later that evening, when Jennifer still hadn't returned, the police officially declared her missing. Although evidence showed she had been in her apartment that morning, authorities initially speculated she might have been abducted the previous night. Based on cell tower data, they concluded she wasn't at home that night. However, her parents strongly disagreed, maintaining that she had stayed in her apartment overnight. Further analysis later confirmed that the initial interpretation of the cell data was incorrect. Jennifer had, in fact, spent the night in her apartment. Rob was questioned by investigators, and he provided a clear alibi, proving that he had nothing to do with his lover's death. Jennifer's family and friends immediately organized efforts to find her, distributing flyers with her photo and appeals for help throughout Orlando. Hundreds of people joined the search. However, as the hours turned into days, hope of finding Jennifer alive began to fade. The police struggled to find leads, and while various theories were proposed, nothing concrete emerged. Witnesses reported seeing Jennifer's car leaving her apartment complex around 7:40 a.m. on the morning she disappeared. However, they couldn't identify who was driving or which direction the car went. 2 days after Jennifer went missing, a tip came into the sheriff's office. Jennifer's car was found abandoned at the apartment complex, located nearly 2 kilometers from her own apartment. Jennifer had no known ties to this area, and her family stated that she had never been there before. When police found the car, they asked Rob to inspect it with them, as they were particularly interested in his reaction. Initially, police feared they might find Jennifer's body, but they found no signs of a struggle or foul play. The car appeared normal. Inside, they discovered Jennifer's cell phone, charger, sandals, and shoes, nothing out of place. Despite continued investigations, no additional evidence was found. The mystery of Jennifer Kess's disappearance persisted, leaving her family and friends in anguish, desperate for answers they might never fully receive. Was it a robbery or a car theft? Witnesses might have seen who was inside the car, but none could be located. However, Police soon discovered crucial evidence when reviewing surveillance footage in the area where the car was found. Around noon on the day Jennifer disappeared, a camera recorded someone driving her car. The person briefly parked near the pool area, reversed, sat in the car for 32 seconds, then got out and walked away without looking back. The surveillance camera captured images every 3 seconds, but the individual's face was obscured each time by a fence post. As a result, their identity could not be determined. Based on the person's walk, police concluded it was a man about 1.65 meters tall, dressed like a construction worker. Detectives distributed the photo, hoping someone might recognize the man from his walk, height, or general appearance, but no leads emerged. At the time, renovations were underway at Jennifer's apartment complex. She had told her parents that construction workers would stop what they were doing and stare at her whenever she walked by. The workers frequently changed, and many were reportedly undocumented. Possibly because of this, they were uncooperative with the investigation and avoided speaking to the police. Due to language barriers, investigators were unable to question these individuals, and no additional evidence linking them to the case was discovered. There were no surveillance cameras in Jennifer's apartment building, and security relied only on a guard logging visitors' names. However, police found that the visitor log had been left blank. In addition, investigators failed to thoroughly search Jennifer's apartment. No security measures were implemented to protect her home, which allowed around 14 people to enter the apartment before the investigation moved forward. This mismanagement significantly harmed the case. Police were also unable to recover fingerprints from the steering wheel or rear-view mirror of Jennifer's car. It is uncertain whether these areas were wiped clean during the brief period when the car was parked. No traces of DNA were found in the vehicle either. Overall, the investigators' efforts were poorly executed, causing the case to stall. By 2008, on the second anniversary of Jennifer's disappearance, her family and friends gathered in Orlando, holding posters with her image in hopes that someone might recognize her. In 2009, a detective revisited the case with a fresh perspective. He tried to talk to a maid who had worked at Jennifer's apartment complex since 2006. The woman said she remembered the young woman's disappearance. When detectives showed her the surveillance photo of the person seen driving Jennifer's car, the maid commented that he looked like a man she had seen before. She wasn't entirely sure, but the man's walk and hairstyle reminded her of him. The detective discovered that the man had previously lived and worked at Jennifer's apartment complex. He had performed maintenance work in Jennifer's apartment just a week before she disappeared. Tracking the man down was easy. He was serving time in a Florida prison for assaulting a young woman, a crime committed 2 years after Jennifer's disappearance. The detective met with him and questioned him about his work in Jennifer's apartment. He admitted to performing maintenance there and claimed that Jennifer had let him in before leaving for work. When shown the surveillance photo of a person resembling him, the man denied it was him, pointing out that the individual appeared to be about 10 centimeters shorter than he is. He was cooperative and denied any involvement. He agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed. The detective then interviewed another worker who had assisted the man with repairs at Jennifer's apartment. The co-worker confirmed they had worked there and stated that everything had gone smoothly. The detective also spoke to the apartment complex manager to check if Jennifer had experienced any conflicts with the man or others. The manager reported that they had noticed no issues. In 2010, this detective was removed from Jennifer's case. Over time, the Kessie family began to feel that the Orlando Police Department had abandoned them. But the police insisted the investigation was still active. In reality, the case had been largely neglected. In 2016, a decade after Jennifer's disappearance, she was officially declared dead in Florida. 2 years later, in December 2018, her parents, Joyce and Drew Kessie, filed a lawsuit against the Orlando Police Department, to gain access to police records from the case. The lawsuit was settled in March 2019. The Orlando police chief gave investigators 6 months to review the case. But when no new leads emerged, he made a pivotal decision. In an unprecedented move, the police department handed over all case materials to the Kesey family. Jennifer's parents received more than 16,000 pages of documents and 67 hours of video and audio recordings. By mutual agreement, the official investigation was closed. The Kesey family then hired private detective to review the case. After examining the files 3 times, the detective expressed shock at the many critical mistakes and oversights made by the Orlando police. The detective began by revisiting the crime scene and speaking with residents of Jennifer's apartment complex. One neighbor had lived there for 2 years before Jennifer disappeared, shared her concerns. She initially appreciated the gated complex with security, but grew uneasy when construction workers began occupying empty apartments. She explained, "When I came home from work, there would be a group of drunk men outside. They would yell unpleasant things or stare at me inappropriately as I walked by. It made me very uncomfortable." Despite complaining to the building management, no action was taken. Another neighbor described even more troubling experiences. She revealed that construction workers had entered her apartment while she was away. She noticed unsettling signs, such as her underwear drawer being opened, evidence of someone using her shower, and footprints in her closet. She also recalled a disturbing incident where she caught one of the workers watching her through a window while engaging in indecent behavior. She reported the incident to the police, but the man was never held accountable. He was merely fired and disappeared. A third neighbor revealed that a construction worker had approached her in the parking lot at night, attempting to start conversations and coming across as overly pushy. She said she encountered him several times a week. In contrast, a fourth neighbor had a more positive impression of the same worker. She said, "I remember him as cheerful, friendly, and talkative." She moved into the complex shortly after Jennifer's disappearance and recalled that this worker frequently visited her apartment. However, Jennifer's name was never mentioned in their conversations. What unsettled this neighbor was that 9 months after Jennifer vanished, the worker suddenly left the complex overnight and disappeared. The man was found through descriptions from neighbors and passed a polygraph test. At this time, when the investigation progressed, the detective uncovered a potential lead. 10 months after Jennifer vanished, a witness reported seeing someone throw a rolled-up carpet into a lake near her apartment complex. At the time, construction workers living in an apartment across from Jennifer's were seen moving carpets, raising suspicions that Jennifer's body might have been hidden in one of the carpets and discarded in the lake. In November 2019, 12 years after Jennifer's disappearance, local police, along with a team of divers, searched the lake where the carpet was reportedly dumped. Despite searching for 2 days, no evidence was found. It has now been 13 years since Jennifer Kesey vanished. After investigating the case for several years, private detective proposed a new theory about her disappearance. Based on interviews with residents of Jennifer's apartment complex, he discovered that approximately 10 construction workers had been living in an empty apartment directly across from Jennifer's unit. He speculated that on the morning of January 24, 2006, as Jennifer was leaving her apartment and locking her door, some of these workers attacked her from behind and dragged her into the vacant apartment. Unfortunately, identifying these individuals has proven impossible, as there are no records or contracts documenting their names. Jennifer's parents have dedicated their lives to finding her. Despite investing significant time and money, they have not yet succeeded. Jennifer's mother expressed the pain of their ongoing search, saying, "It's very, very hard to move forward. The hole in our hearts will remain until we have answers." Jennifer's boyfriend, Rob Allen, also shared that he frequently thinks of her and imagines the life they might have had together if not for this tragedy. The Jennifer Kessie case remains one of the most mysterious and heartbreaking missing persons cases, enduring for more than 18 years without clear answers. The Kessie family continues to seek justice and holds hope that one day, new clues will emerge to help solve the case. The Kessie family remains hopeful for Jennifer's return. They are offering a $15,000 reward for any information that could lead to her whereabouts. Despite extensive investigations and search efforts, Jennifer's whereabouts remain unknown to this day. This case serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of sustaining public interest and support in the pursuit of justice for missing persons.